Hey there, welcome to Broderos. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe right away. If you end up not enjoying it, you can always take it back later. Get cozy and let the fear take over. I woke up in the middle of the night, a strange sensation pulling me from the depths of sleep. It wasn't the usual stirrings of the house settling or the rustling of wind outside. No, this was different. My hand, it felt cold, as if something or someone had brushed it with icy fingers. I lay still, breathing quietly, trying to convince myself it was just a draft. But no, that wasn't it. I looked around in the dark, my heart thudding in my chest. The room was silent, too silent. The walls, once familiar and comforting, now felt like a cage. I tried to move my hand, but it was as if it was glued to the sheets. My fingertips tingled, an odd mixture of discomfort and something far worse. I shifted, the covers rustling under me, and strained my eyes, trying to see anything in the thick, suffocating darkness. It was as if the room had swallowed every ounce of light. My own breath felt loud, too loud, and the quiet stretched like a rope pulling tighter and tighter around me. And then, I felt it again. The cold touch. Slowly, deliberately, it traced the back of my hand. My skin went numb from the chill. My heart skipped, then started hammering in my chest, so loud I thought it might break the stillness. What was happening? I could hardly breathe, hardly think. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to run, to leap from the bed and flee into the safety of the hallway, but my body wouldn't obey. My muscles locked, the weight of fear pressing on me like a hand on my chest. I had to look. I had to see what it was. Maybe I could explain it away. Maybe it was just my imagination. I turned my head, slowly, fighting the instinct to look away. And there, at the edge of the bed, I saw something moving. Long fingers, pale and thin, creeping from beneath the mattress. They glided silently, stretching towards my hand, their tips brushing the skin like a whisper against my nerves. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't a dream. This wasn't a draft. I wasn't alone. The fingers, impossibly long, seemed to go on forever, disappearing into the shadows under the bed. They were gone almost as quickly as they appeared, leaving only the cold trace on my skin. I pulled my hand back, but the cold didn't leave. It stayed there, crawling beneath my skin, sinking into the marrow of my bones. I could still feel them, those fingers, still touching me. Still there, even though I couldn't see them. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. And then, the silence returned. The silence in the room was suffocating, but it was more than just the absence of sound. It was something darker, something that pressed against me, heavier than the blankets. My mind raced, trying to latch onto something, anything that made sense. The room felt smaller, more oppressive. I should have gotten up. I should have screamed, but I was paralyzed. I kept staring at the spot under the bed where those fingers had disappeared. My hand still burned from where the cold had touched it. I could feel the chill crawling up my wrist, spreading like frost. But the rest of me was on fire, my skin prickling with the heat of fear. My breathing was shallow, uneven. I tried to calm myself. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I'd imagined it. I tried to tell myself that anything to break the tension that gripped my chest. But even as I whispered these lies to myself, I could feel the weight of the air pressing down on me. I felt eyes on me, unseen, but definitely there. Watching. I pulled my hand into my chest, curling it against my body, desperately trying to hold on to warmth. The more I tried to ignore it, the more it felt like the darkness around me was alive. I couldn't explain it. The shadows seemed to move in ways that shadows shouldn't. Then, I heard it. A soft whisper. Not from my own mind. It was too real, too clear. Help me. The voice was barely audible, a rasping, breathy sound that came from the very corner of the room. I held my breath, trying to focus. It was so quiet now, just the faintest scrape of air. But the voice. It was close, too close, as if someone had leaned in beside me and whispered directly into my ear. I snapped my head toward the corner. The darkness there seemed thicker, denser, more oppressive. The shadows clung to the edges of the room like a living thing. There was nothing. No figure. Just more darkness. But I could feel it. That heavy presence, waiting, watching. My heart pounded in my chest. I wanted to scream, to jump out of bed and run, but my body wouldn't move. It was as though I was frozen in place, the paralysis of fear tightening its grip on me. I strained my ears. The voice. It was soft at first, but it began to grow louder. The words were distorted, incomprehensible at times, as if they were being dragged through the thick air like something struggling to reach the surface. The whisper became frantic, desperate. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to do something. Anything. I pushed myself up, my legs shaking with the effort. The bed creaked under me, loud in the oppressive silence. My feet hit the floor with a soft thud, but the sound felt like thunder. The room seemed to stretch, the walls closing in around me. My eyes darted around. The cold was everywhere now, creeping into my skin, into my bones. It had followed me, that cold touch, like an invisible hand that refused to let go. My breath came in shallow gasps. I reached for the light switch, my hand trembling. But the lights didn't flicker on. I cursed under my breath, reaching again, frantically now. But nothing happened. The room remained as dark as before. The whispering grew louder, frantic now, almost frantic enough to shake the very air. Help me! Help me! It screamed. A woman's voice, high-pitched and panicked. But then, beneath the desperation, there was something else. Something darker. I froze. It was no longer a woman's voice. It was something wrong. The way the words were shaped, the way they echoed in my mind, they didn't belong. And then, in the corner of the room, a shape began to form. Slowly. Barely visible at first, like smoke swirling in the air. The figure was tall, thin, impossibly so, like a shadow stretched out of shape. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. I was rooted to the spot, my body unwilling to obey my commands. The figure took one step toward me, its movements jerky and unnatural. Its limbs bent at odd angles. The fingers, those long, pale fingers, reached for me again. But it wasn't the fingers that terrified me most. It was the face. The face that began to emerge from the darkness. It was almost human. Almost. But the eyes, wide, too empty, stared at me with a hunger I couldn't understand. The skin of its face seemed stretched too tight, as though something was trying to break free beneath it. I could feel the darkness closing in around me, suffocating me, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the thing that had come out of it. I could hear its breathing, ragged, shallow, like it was struggling to exist in this world. Its mouth opened. It said something again, a name I didn't understand, but this time it was louder. And then, a chilling sensation gripped my wrist. I looked down. The cold fingers were there, once again touching me. Slowly, pulling me toward it. No escape. The cold fingers wrapped around my wrist, unyielding, their touch colder than any winter night I had ever known. The ice burned through my skin, sinking deep into the marrow of my bones. I tried to scream, but no sound came. My throat was tight, choked by the cold that now enveloped me. My body refused to move. I couldn't even blink. It was as if I was paralyzed, caught in the grip of something far stronger than fear itself. The thing before me, this distorted figure, lurched closer. Its limbs creaked and groaned with unnatural angles, stretching further than they should. The movement was jerky, as if the body didn't quite know how to move, as if the shadow was still learning to take shape. Each step it took seemed to scrape against the very air itself, the sound a dull, rasping noise, like nails dragging across the floor. I wanted to tear my wrist from its grasp, to escape, but the fingers were like ice-cold steel, cold enough to make my blood run cold. My skin prickled where it touched me, as though the cold was seeping into the very depths of my soul. The thing's mouth opened wider, impossibly wide, its jaw unhinging in a grotesque manner that defied reality. It was a soundless scream, but the horror of it hit me like a physical blow. Its eyes, those empty, dark voids, never left mine. I could feel them probing, pulling at me, like they were reaching inside my mind, dragging out every last scrap of sanity I had left. My mind screamed at me to look away, to do anything, but I was caught. I couldn't tear my gaze away from its unblinking stare. It was as if the darkness behind its eyes was sucking me in, inch by inch. "Help me," it whispered again, but now it was no longer a plea. It was a command. The voice was distorted, echoing in the corners of my mind. It wasn't a sound, it was a presence. A command that demanded I obey, that I move, that I follow. I shook my head, my vision blurring. I couldn't breathe. The air was thick, suffocating. I had to get away. I had to run, but my legs refused to respond. I was a prisoner in my own body. My pulse thundered in my ears, drowning out all other noise. The thing continued its slow, deliberate approach. Each movement felt like an eternity. The closer it got, the more I felt my sense of reality slipping away. The room, my room, had warped into something else. The walls had stretched impossibly far. The shadows hung like thick curtains, wrapping around the room and closing in on me. The corners seemed to flicker in and out of existence, as if the very fabric of the space was beginning to tear apart. And then, just as I thought I might collapse under the weight of it all, the creature reached forward, its long fingers brushing against my face. I flinched, but I couldn't pull away. The touch was icy, freezing, and yet it burned at the same time, like frostbite creeping over my skin. The thing's fingers ran down my cheek, tracing the contours of my face with a slow, deliberate cruelty. Its touch left a trail of cold that burned deeper than anything I had ever felt. I felt something inside me begin to snap. I wasn't just afraid now. I was being consumed by it. The terror was eating away at me, feeding on my panic. My thoughts became muddled. The thing's breath, if it could even be called breath, came in ragged gasps, an unnatural sound that vibrated in the air around me. And then I heard it again. "Help me," the voice whispered, but this time it wasn't just a whisper. It was a command, a demand that forced itself into my mind like a parasite burrowing deep into my thoughts. The thing's fingers tightened around my wrist. My skin burned, but I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. I was trapped. I had to get away. There was no other choice. But how? And then I felt it. A small shift in the air, just a slight movement, a change in the temperature. The cold was gone, just like that. The thing's grip loosened, and my hand fell limp to my side. I blinked, my eyes struggling to adjust to the dim light that had somehow returned to the room. The creature, it was gone. Vanished. But the cold remained. That chill still hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I stood there, trembling, my body refusing to obey. I looked around the room, my mind spinning in a whirl of confusion. Had it been real? Had I imagined it all? But then, I saw something that made my stomach drop. There, at the edge of the bed, was a single long, pale finger. It was stretched out, resting on the floor. And it was still cold. I stared at the pale finger on the floor, my mind struggling to piece together what had just happened. The room felt smaller now, the air thicker, as if the walls had closed in around me in the seconds I'd let my guard down. My body trembled with each breath, my pulse a frantic drumbeat in my ears. I was sweating despite the biting cold that still clung to my skin. But it was the finger that held me in place, frozen to the spot. It wasn't just a finger, it was a reminder. A warning. The thing, the creature, it hadn't gone. It was still here. Somewhere. I took a step back, my foot brushing against the edge of the bed, sending a shudder of cold through my legs. The floor beneath me felt damp, like the chill had soaked into the very wood. The air was thick with something, an oppressive weight that squeezed my chest tighter with every breath. I reached for the light switch again, but my hand faltered. What if I turned it on, only to see that thing standing there again? Or worse, what if the thing had never left at all? I couldn't trust anything anymore. The room, the walls, the shadows, they all felt wrong. I was trapped, not just by fear, but by the uncertainty of what was real. I had no idea what was happening. But the fear, the cold, the whispers, they were all too real. I forced myself to look away from the finger on the floor, but as I did, I caught something out of the corner of my eye. A movement. A flicker. Something in the dark. My heart skipped a beat, and I snapped my gaze back to the corner of the room where I'd seen the figure before. Nothing. I swallowed hard, my breath coming quicker now. Was it my imagination? Or was it still there? I stepped back again, this time more slowly, careful not to make a sound. I felt my way across the room, my hand brushing against the cold walls for guidance. The floor beneath my feet creaked, each movement sounding like an explosion in the stillness. My mind raced. Should I run? Should I stay and wait for whatever was happening to end? But then I heard it. A sound, soft at first, like a whisper, barely perceptible. But it grew louder, clearer, until it was unmistakable. A slow, deliberate scraping sound. It was coming from beneath the bed. I froze. My feet felt like they were made of lead, too heavy to move. The scraping sound continued, rhythmic and methodical, like fingernails dragging across wood. And then, something else, a soft sound, like a low moan, rising from somewhere deep inside the dark. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. The sound was suffocating, wrapping around me, filling the room. It was as if the darkness itself had come alive. My legs gave way, and I sank down to the floor, my hands gripping the edge of the bed for support. The scraping grew louder, more frantic. And then, there was a sound I knew all too well, the sound of breathing. It was slow, ragged, but it wasn't mine. I pressed my back against the wall, my eyes darting around the room, searching for any sign of movement. There was nothing. Just the dark. But I could feel it, something was there, in the shadows. I couldn't see it, but I knew it was waiting. Watching. And then, from the dark, came a low, guttural voice, no words, just sounds, unintelligible and foreign. It was so close I could feel the vibrations in the air, crawling beneath my skin, sending a shiver down my spine. "Please," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Please, leave me alone." The room was suffocating. The shadows seemed to bend, to twist, as if they were alive, drawing closer, enclosing me in their grasp. The scraping sound stopped abruptly, replaced by something else, a soft thud, followed by the creak of the floorboards. I wasn't alone anymore. A figure moved from the corner of my eye. It wasn't the same one from before. This one was smaller, twisted and hunched. It moved in jerky, uneven motions, its limbs contorted, as if they didn't belong to a body. It came closer, the air growing colder with every step it took. I could hear the breath again, shallow and rasping, as though it had to fight for every inhale. I should have run, I should have screamed, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed again. The shadows reached toward me, like tendrils of darkness, curling around the figure, forming it, shaping it. And then, I saw them, its eyes. They were wide, too wide, the pupils nothing but black pits that swallowed the light. I could feel them on me, drilling into my mind, pulling me in. I wanted to look away, but the eyes, they held me there. It reached out, and I could see its fingers, thin and elongated, stretching toward me, their tips glowing faintly in the dark, as if they were dipped in something cold and luminous. It was no longer a figure. It was a thing that shouldn't exist. Something unnatural, something born of nightmares. And it spoke, its voice a rasping whisper that scraped against my very soul. "Look into my eyes." I tried to look away, to shut my eyes, but they wouldn't close. I couldn't move. The darkness was closing in, and all I could hear was its voice, whispering over and over again. "Look into my eyes." I felt my breath catch on my throat, trapped in the suffocating grip of the thing's eyes. It wasn't just the force of its gaze that paralyzed me. No, its eyes were an abyss, pulling me in deeper with every heartbeat. My thoughts were no longer my own. The world around me began to fade, to distort, the edges of reality fraying like an old, worn tapestry. The darkness closed in tighter. The room itself began to twist, its familiar shape warping into something alien. The walls stretched, receded, and the ceiling seemed to collapse inward, lowering itself like the oppressive weight of the thing's gaze. I tried to speak, to scream, but my mouth betrayed me. I was silenced, my tongue thick and heavy in my mouth. The cold in the air deepened, seeping into my bones. My fingertips began to ache, and my skin prickled with an icy burn. It was as though the very blood in my veins had been replaced with frozen ice, each pulse bringing with it a growing numbness. My hands were trembling, and I couldn't stop them. But it wasn't just fear anymore, it was something much deeper, something primal that rattled my core. "Look into my eyes," it repeated, its voice rasping like nails on a chalkboard, jagged and sharp. It wasn't even a question anymore, just a command. The more it spoke, the more I felt myself losing control of my own mind, my thoughts crumbling like brittle paper. The thing's fingers hovered inches from my face now. I could feel the cold of them, the unnatural chill that emanated from them even as I tried to shrink back. But my body wouldn't obey. The thing's presence was too overwhelming, too all-consuming. My muscles were frozen, locked in place, unwilling to move even as my mind screamed for escape. I stared into its eyes. The emptiness behind them was suffocating, like being trapped in a cave with no light. It was dark, endless, a void that pulled at the very essence of who I was. Every time I blinked, I saw something new, visions that didn't belong, things that shouldn't exist. Flickers of faces flashed before me, hollow, twisted figures, their features mangled beyond recognition. A glimpse of a woman with hollow eyes, her lips curled in a silent scream. A child, eyes wide with terror, reaching out, but vanishing the moment I tried to focus. The faces blurred and melted together, shifting and reshaping with each passing second, like reflections in a cracked mirror. And then, something else. A vision of my own face, my reflection, twisted and distorted in the blackness. It was a mockery of who I was, something unfamiliar, something wrong. The reflection smiled, but it wasn't my smile. It was crooked, unnatural, stretching too wide for a human face. I could feel the panic rising, clawing at my chest. But it was more than just panic now. It was despair. The kind of despair that sinks into your soul, the kind that makes you feel like you've already lost even before the fight has begun. I wanted to look away. I wanted to tear my eyes away from the creature's gaze. But every time I tried, it was as if the air itself was too thick, pulling me back toward it, drowning me in its stare. It spoke again, its voice low and melodic, though it held a strange, unsettling rhythm. "You see them, don't you?" it asked, its voice sliding under my skin like oil. "You see what they've become. What you've become." I didn't answer. I couldn't. "Look closer," it coaxed, and suddenly its fingers were upon me. They slid across my face, freezing my skin, their touch like ice cutting into me. I tried to recoil, but the touch was insistent, holding me in place. And then, through the fog of my mind, a single thought broke through, the thought that I had to move, I had to escape. But it wasn't just a thought anymore. It was a desperate need, a primal instinct that burned through the coldness, through the terror. I gathered every ounce of strength I had left and forced myself to close my eyes. The pressure of its gaze lifted, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe again. The room around me stopped shifting, the oppressive darkness receding, if only for a moment. I opened my eyes again, but the thing was gone. The cold still lingered, a chill that gnawed at my skin. The shadows remained, though the oppressive weight of them seemed lessened. My hands were shaking, my breath ragged and uneven, but I was still here. I was still alive. I slowly turned my head, scanning the room. Everything appeared as it should, mundane, familiar. The bed, the desk, the window with the dim light seeping through the blinds. But then I saw it. The thing's finger was no longer on the floor. It had moved. It was now resting on the pillow next to mine. I didn't want to look again. I knew what I would see if I did. But the temptation was too strong. My eyes drifted to the spot where the finger had once been. And there, just above the pillow, were two small, dark shapes. Eyes. They were watching me. And then, the thing whispered again, its voice distant yet impossibly close. "You can't escape. Not yet. Not ever." A shiver ran down my spine. I didn't know how much more of this I could take. But I also knew this, whatever it was, whatever had found me, wasn't finished yet. It started with a whisper. I was sitting on the couch, half watching an old movie that I'd seen a dozen times before. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. Outside, the rain pelted against the windows, but inside, everything was still. It was the kind of silence that clung to you, heavy and unyielding. I was lost in thought, my mind drifting somewhere far off, when I heard it. A voice. It wasn't loud. In fact, it was soft, almost soothing. But it wasn't coming from the TV. It wasn't coming from anywhere in the room, really. It seemed to come from the air itself. A soft, gentle voice calling my name. Michael. I froze. I knew that voice. It was unmistakable. It was my mother's. The voice seemed to linger in the air, soft, almost as if it were beckoning me. I felt my chest tighten, my body freezing in place. But then something in me snapped. I pushed the unease aside. It was just the sound of my imagination running wild. I hadn't heard from her in weeks, but that didn't mean anything. Still, the voice, the way it had whispered my name, something felt wrong. I stood up, my mind spinning with uncertainty. The apartment was still. Nothing had changed. I felt a chill settle over my shoulders as I walked toward the kitchen. Maybe she had called me for some reason, some distant memory playing tricks on my mind. As I entered the kitchen, the familiar scent of old wood and a faint trace of cooking oil hit me. It was exactly as I had left it, the sink piled with dirty dishes, the empty coffee mugs on the counter, the faint glow of the streetlight outside slipping through the window. No one was there. No sign of anyone. Not even a shadow of movement. I stood there for a moment, just staring at the empty space, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My heart was still racing. The voice. It wasn't possible, but it had felt so real. Slowly, I turned and walked back toward the living room, my footsteps muffled by the carpet. As I stepped into the room, I heard something else, a soft, almost imperceptible whisper. This time, it wasn't calling my name. It was just words, just a breathy sound in the silence. "You're fast." I froze again. This time, the voice wasn't familiar. It wasn't my mother's. It wasn't anyone I recognized. But it knew me. It knew something about me. It was like it had been waiting for me to return, waiting for me to walk back into the room. My heart pounded in my chest, louder than the rain now. I turned around, my eyes scanning the empty corners of the apartment, the shadows that seemed to stretch longer than they should have. I didn't know what to make of it. The voice, it was too real. Too specific. I hadn't told anyone I was coming home early, yet it had known. It knew I had been in the kitchen. And now, it was watching me, waiting for something. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. I hadn't been sleeping well lately, stress, work, and everything else piling on. I couldn't let myself get carried away by it. But the voice, no, the whispers, stayed with me. They lingered in the back of my mind, curling around my thoughts like smoke, too close to ignore. I tried to shake it off, but the feeling lingered. The apartment, which had always been my safe haven, now felt foreign. Each creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind rattling the windows seemed to carry a sense of menace. I sat back down on the couch, but I didn't turn on the TV. The screen was just a blank reflection of myself, pale and inert. My mind was still on the voice. The whisper. It wasn't like a distant memory. It was too real, too present. Almost like someone was standing right there in the room with me, watching me. The feeling crept up my spine, cold and sharp. "Michael," the voice whispered again, but this time it sounded closer. It wasn't from the kitchen or the hallway. It was from behind me. I spun around, heart racing in my chest, but of course, no one was there. The room was empty, as it had been moments before. I wasn't sure what I was expecting. Maybe I thought I'd see something, a shadow, a figure, something that could explain it all. But there was nothing. Just the oppressive quiet. Still, the sense of being watched didn't go away. I could feel it. There was something in the air, pressing in on me. I stood up abruptly, trying to force myself into action. I needed to calm down. I had to. I moved to the window, pulling back the curtain to peek outside. The rain had slowed, and the street below was nearly empty, bathed in the cold glow of the streetlights. It was a small neighborhood, quiet, isolated, just the way I liked it. But today, everything felt wrong. The air felt different. The silence felt too thick, as if the world itself was holding its breath. I needed a distraction. My phone. I reached into my pocket and pulled it out, hoping for a message, a call, anything to remind me that life was still normal, still real. But the screen was black. It hadn't been on for long, but now it wouldn't turn on. I checked the battery, fully charged. I tried again. Nothing. I cursed under my breath and tossed it on the couch. The silence returned. But it wasn't empty. It was full of anticipation. And then I heard it again. "Michael." The voice was unmistakable. And this time, it was right behind me. I turned quickly, almost losing my balance, but again, no one. Nothing. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in place. Seconds? Minutes? I wasn't sure. I couldn't move. The voice had become a constant, like a shadow, lurking just beyond my senses, always just out of view. Always just out of reach. I finally forced myself to move again, stepping cautiously toward the hallway. My feet felt heavy, like they didn't belong to me. I wasn't sure if it was fear or something else that was holding me back, but I had to know. I had to figure out what was going on. I walked through the door into the small hallway, half expecting something to jump out at me. But it was empty. Just a dark stretch of carpet leading to the bedrooms and the bathroom. It was then that I noticed the air. It wasn't cold, but it felt heavier, thick, as if it were pressing in from all sides. I stopped, listening. The silence was oppressive. But then I heard it again. "Michael, you've been here before." My blood ran cold. I hadn't told anyone about my past here, nothing about the memories that still haunted me, the mistakes that had followed me into this apartment. No one knew. But whoever was speaking, they did. I stumbled back, my pulse hammering in my ears. Who was this? How did they know? How did they know about me, about my history? The idea of someone, or something, in my apartment knowing things they shouldn't felt suffocating. I couldn't stay here. I had to leave. I needed to get out, to find some sort of answer, or at least distance myself from the growing dread. But before I could take another step, the voice came again, this time loud enough to make my skin crawl. "You won't leave, Michael." I froze. The voice wasn't whispering now. It was clear, steady, but filled with something darker. A certainty. And I knew then. I wasn't alone. Not anymore. The question was, who or what was waiting for me in the dark? My body was frozen. The voice, now a chilling presence, echoed through the apartment as if it were part of the very walls. "You won't leave, Michael." I tried to take a breath, but my lungs felt tight. I could hear the sound of my heartbeat in my ears, pounding like a drum, each thud reverberating in the silence of the hallway. The air had grown thick, almost suffocating, and the shadows that clung to the edges of the room seemed to stretch just a little longer, darker. I glanced over my shoulder, expecting something to be there, anything. But once again, there was nothing, no figure, no movement, just the same empty space I had been standing in moments ago. I should have run. I should have done anything but stand there, listening to that voice, to whatever was tormenting me. But I couldn't. I felt like I was rooted to the spot, as if the very air itself was holding me in place, locking me into the moment. The voice spoke again, a cruel familiarity in its tone. "You really think you can run from me? You've been running your whole life, haven't you?" The words sliced through me. The fear that had been lingering beneath the surface now twisted into something deeper, something more personal. The voice wasn't just taunting me, it was digging into my past, into the things I had tried to forget. I staggered backward into the living room, my hands trembling. I reached for my phone again, hoping for some form of communication, some sign that I wasn't losing my mind. But once again, it remained lifeless, its screen dark and unresponsive. I felt trapped, not just in the apartment, but in my own mind. The memories came flooding back, memories of my past, of decisions I had made, of mistakes I couldn't undo. The voice knew things about me that no one else could know. Not even the people I trusted. The silence that followed the voice was more unsettling than anything. It was as if the very air had grown still, waiting for something to happen. I turned around quickly, expecting to find something watching me from the dark corner of the room, but there was only the faint glow of the streetlights outside, casting long shadows across the floor. The shadows didn't move. They were just shadows. I was being paranoid. That's what I told myself. But then I heard it again. Faint at first, like a whisper just outside of hearing, but then growing louder. "You know what you did, Michael. Don't you? It's all your fault." I spun around. This time, the voice didn't come from one direction. It came from everywhere. The walls seemed to hum with its presence, vibrating with each word it spoke. "You can't escape what you are," it said, now closer, almost a growl. "You never could." A chill ran through me. My throat went dry. The voice knew about that, the thing I had been running from all my life. The thing I'd left behind when I moved to this city. It knew. I started to back away, my breath quickening, a cold sweat forming on my skin. The walls felt like they were closing in, like the very apartment was shifting around me, drawing me into its grip. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All I could do was listen. "I see you, Michael," the voice said softly, almost lovingly. "I see everything you've tried to hide. You can't run from me, because I'm always here, inside of you." My legs felt weak. I needed to leave, but where could I go? The apartment felt like a cage, every door and window a trap, every corner a dead end. The fear was overwhelming, like the walls themselves were pressing against me, tightening around my chest. Then, just as quickly as it had begun, the voice fell silent. The stillness was unbearable. It pressed in on me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. My eyes darted around the room, but there was nothing, just the faint glow of the streetlights casting shadows, the silence wrapping its cold fingers around me. I moved toward the door. I had to get out. I couldn't stay here. Whatever this was, it was no longer just in my head. Something was in this place. Something I couldn't see but could feel, crawling beneath my skin. I reached for the doorknob, but as my fingers brushed against it, the voice whispered again, this time more soothing, more intimate. "Going somewhere, Michael?" I turned sharply, my heart leaping in my chest. The room was still empty. But it didn't feel empty. It felt full of eyes, full of something watching me from every corner, from the very walls themselves. The voice wasn't just in my head anymore. It was everywhere. And I couldn't escape. I froze, my hand still on the doorknob. The voice was everywhere, reverberating off the walls, curling around me like smoke, suffocating me. "Don't bother trying to leave," it said softly, almost sympathetically. "You never truly left, Michael." Not really. I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened as if an invisible weight had been placed upon it. I knew I should run. I knew I had to get out. But my legs wouldn't move. The apartment, once familiar, now felt like an alien world, twisted, like it was bending to some unseen force. I turned around slowly, my eyes scanning every shadow, every inch of space, desperate for something that would make sense of this. The air was thick with dread, clinging to me like a second skin. I could hear my heartbeat, loud and erratic in the silence that followed the voice's final words. Every second stretched into infinity, but there was no escape, no way out of this nightmare. "You're not alone, Michael," the voice continued, now almost a whisper, like it was right behind me. "We've always been here, watching you." I spun around, expecting to see someone. But again, nothing. No figure, no shadow, just the same empty apartment. And yet, I could feel it, a presence, something watching me, something waiting. It was like the walls were closing in around me, slowly, relentlessly. "What do you want from me?" I found my voice, barely above a whisper. The question was pointless, I knew that. But I couldn't help myself. I had to ask. I needed to know. The voice chuckled softly, the sound cold and hollow. "What?" "No, Michael. I don't want anything. I've already got you." The words hit me like a blow to the chest, knocking the wind out of me. I stumbled back, my mind racing to make sense of what was happening. The walls seemed to close in tighter, the air growing colder with each passing second. The voice, with its cruel certainty, wasn't just in my head anymore. It was real, tangible, something that had always been here, lurking in the shadows of my past. I shook my head, trying to shake off the panic rising inside me. This couldn't be happening. I had to be imagining this. It had to be some kind of hallucination, a breakdown, something, anything but the truth. "Stop," I pleaded, my voice barely a whisper. "Just stop." But the voice didn't stop. It was as if it had been waiting for me to ask that question. "You can't escape what's inside you, Michael," it said, its tone almost affectionate. The truth has always been with you. You just didn't want to see it. I felt something cold brush against my skin, like fingers running along the back of my neck. I spun around, but there was nothing. No one. The silence pressed in again, heavier now, more oppressive. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs felt like lead. My body was betraying me, locking me in place, forcing me to listen, to confront whatever this was. I stepped back, trying to make sense of it. The floor creaked beneath me, and for a moment, I thought I saw something move in the corner of my eye. My head whipped around, but again, there was nothing, just the shadows that seemed to stretch longer, deeper, with every second. I started to breathe harder, faster, the fear building inside me. The voice had been right about one thing. It knew things. Things I had buried, things I had pushed away. It knew the darkest parts of me, the parts one tried so hard to forget. It was like the voice had reached into my mind, peeled back my memories, and found everything I had hidden deep inside. And now it was playing with me, toying with me, making me confront the things I wasn't ready to face. Why now? I asked, barely able to get the words out. Why are you doing this to me? The voice didn't answer at first. It lingered, as if savoring the moment, and then, just when I thought I couldn't take any more, it spoke again, soft and almost tender. Because, Michael, it's time. The room seemed to shift. The shadows grew thicker, darker, twisting around me like tendrils. I reached for the door again, but my hand was trembling. It felt wrong. The door seemed so far away now, as if it were miles from where I stood. Time for what? I whispered, my voice cracking. I didn't want to know, but I had to ask. To face what you've always known, the voice replied. The truth about yourself. Suddenly, the room felt smaller. The walls seemed to close in, the air growing dense with a kind of pressure I couldn't explain. The apartment felt alive now, the space itself shifting like it was bending under the weight of something terrible. My heart pounded in my chest. I knew I couldn't escape. Not from the apartment, not from the voice, not from whatever had taken root inside me. And then, as if the room itself had grown tired of my questioning, it whispered again. You'll see, Michael. You'll see everything. And just like that, everything went dark. I woke up with a jolt, gasping for breath, my heart pounding in my chest. For a moment, I couldn't remember where I was. The darkness around me was thick, suffocating, but there was a faint, familiar hum, the hum of my apartment. I was still here. I was still here. I sat up, disoriented. The air felt cold against my skin, but it wasn't the same kind of cold as before. This wasn't just the temperature, it was like the room had shifted, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something. Or someone. My eyes darted to the corners of the room, searching for any sign of movement, any flicker of shadow. The silence was unbearable. The kind of silence that makes you wonder if something is just waiting, lurking in the dark. I stood up slowly, my legs shaky, as though my body didn't quite trust itself anymore. The faint light from the street outside filtered through the curtains, casting long, distorted shadows on the walls. The room seemed smaller somehow, claustrophobic. The familiar shapes of furniture felt foreign, warped. I forced myself to move toward the kitchen. The voice was still there in my head, echoing its last words, replaying them over and over. You'll see everything. What did that mean? What truth had I been avoiding? The kitchen was just as I'd left it. Cold. Empty. But there was a strange feeling in the air, like something was off. I could feel it, like the floor was shifting under me, like the walls were closing in. The feeling of being watched was so strong that it was almost suffocating. I stepped closer to the counter, my hand reaching out to steady myself. My fingers brushed against something cold, metal, sharp. My heart skipped a beat. I turned my head quickly, but nothing was there. Only the faint outline of the knife block sitting innocuously on the counter. I pulled my hand back, breathing heavily. It was all in my head. It had to be. But deep down, I wasn't sure anymore. The silence was thick, almost oppressive. I turned toward the door, wanting to leave, wanting to escape. But my feet were rooted to the floor. I couldn't move. Something was stopping me, something inside me, deep in the pit of my stomach. Michael. The voice. Again. It wasn't just in my head anymore. It was real. Real and too close. I spun around, my pulse racing. But once again, there was nothing. No figure, no shadow, nothing but the empty apartment, the walls closing in around me. I took a step back, my breath coming in short gasps. Don't run from me. The voice was clear, almost gentle, but there was no mistaking the warning in its tone. It knew I was trying to escape. It wanted me to run. To feel that helplessness, that terror. Why are you doing this to me? I whispered, my voice cracking. I felt my throat tighten as if I was choking on the question. Why now? The darkness in the room seemed to pulse, as if reacting to my words. The shadows twisted and writhed, taking on an almost living form, stretching and shrinking, as if they had a mind of their own. Because you've been running from the truth for too long, Michael, the voice responded. Its tone was calm, almost soothing, but I could hear the underlying malice in every syllable. You can't escape it anymore. I clenched my fists, fighting the panic that was rising in my chest. No. I don't want to know. I don't want to know what you're talking about. The room seemed to shudder, the air growing thick and heavy. My vision blurred for a moment, and then, in an instant, the shadows in the room shifted, drawing closer, like hands reaching for me. I could feel the weight of their presence, the pressure in the air, as if the walls themselves were closing in. I stumbled backward, my mind racing. My heart pounded in my ears. I could feel the truth. I could feel it coming for me, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop it. The voice was everywhere now, inside my head, in the very air around me. It's too late, Michael, it whispered. You've already seen it. You've always known. I screamed, a guttural, primal sound that echoed off the walls. My legs gave way beneath me, and I collapsed to the floor, shaking uncontrollably. The apartment, the shadows, the voice, everything was closing in, suffocating me. No! I shouted, my voice desperate. But the voice didn't stop. It never stopped. You can't run from what you are, it said, its voice no longer cold, but filled with a strange, twisted compassion. You've always known, Michael. It's inside you. And in that moment, the truth hit me like a freight train. It wasn't just the apartment that had changed. It wasn't just the voice that was torturing me. I had changed. I was the truth. And it had been with me all along. It started with a question that kept running through my mind, something I couldn't quite shake. How could they get there? I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing on the nightstand. The faint morning light was just beginning to filter in through the curtains, casting long shadows across the room. My head throbbed, and my throat was dry. I hadn't slept well again. But that wasn't unusual. Ever since I started having these dreams, the lines between sleep and wakefulness had become blurrier. I grabbed my phone and glanced at the screen. It was a picture, a photo I didn't remember taking. The image was blurry at first, but as my eyes focused, the details became clearer. A street, unfamiliar, lined with old brick buildings, their windows dark and empty. The sky was overcast, the air heavy with an unseen weight. There was a chill to the image, a feeling that something wasn't right about it. I frowned. Where was this? I've never been here. I zoomed in on the image, trying to make sense of it, but the more I looked, the more uncomfortable I felt. The shadows in the photos seemed to shift, like they were alive, watching. My hands trembled slightly, and for a moment, I wondered if I was still dreaming. But no! This was real. I could feel the cold air of the room, the solid weight of my phone in my hand. I opened my gallery to look at other photos, maybe just to reassure myself. But as I scrolled down, more pictures appeared, ones I didn't remember taking. Different places, different faces. A narrow alleyway bathed in dim light. A cafe with dusty windows. A dense forest, the trees twisted in unnatural shapes. They were all strange, disconnected, but somehow they felt familiar, like I had seen them before, in my dreams. I rubbed my eyes, trying to clear the fog in my mind. This isn't possible. These can't be my photos. I remembered my dreams from the night before, vivid, so real that they had bled into my waking life. The same blurry streak from the photo. The alleyway that stretched endlessly in front of me. The oppressive feeling of being watched. I couldn't remember how I'd gotten there, but I remembered the coldness in the air, the quiet that felt too thick. Why didn't I notice it sooner? My heart raced in my chest, and a cold sweat broke out on my forehead. The dreams were no longer just dreams. They were leaving marks on my reality. Things that weren't supposed to be real. I thought I had been imagining it. The images, the sounds, the feelings of being in those places, they all felt so tangible, but I couldn't bring myself to believe they were real. I had convinced myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But now I wasn't so sure. I opened the most recent picture again, zooming in on the corner. A detail caught my eye, a small figure in the distance, partially hidden by the shadows. I couldn't make out its face, but the shape was unmistakable. A person, standing there, watching me. My stomach churned. I had never seen this person in my life, but somehow, I knew it was connected to me. I could feel it deep in my gut, like a premonition. Then, my phone buzzed again, startling me. I looked at the screen. Another message. Another picture. This time, it was different, a close-up of a mirror, a reflection of a room that looked disturbingly like mine. But there was no one in the reflection. Only the emptiness, the vacant space where I should have been. I stumbled back, the phone slipping from my hand. My mind raced. What the hell is going on? I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was just some kind of glitch. Maybe some app was acting up, messing with my photos. But the cold feeling in the pit of my stomach wouldn't go away. I picked up the phone again, wiping my palms on my pants. There was something wrong. Something wrong with me, with the photos, with the dreams. I could hear the faint sound of my own breathing as I looked at the last picture again. The mirror. The empty room. My reflection was gone, but the mirror remained. There was something about it, something subtle that I hadn't noticed at first. The reflection wasn't exactly empty. There was something else in it. A shadow, a dark shape that was just out of reach. It almost seemed like it was waiting for me. I shook my head. It's nothing. It's just a dream. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. It wasn't just a dream anymore. I walked to the window, trying to shake the unease creeping up my spine. The city was waking up outside, people going about their routines, unaware of what was happening to me. Unaware of the fact that these photos, these images, were no longer just in my dreams, they were real. They were showing up in the world around me, invading my waking life. I wanted to tell myself it was a coincidence, a fluke. But the feeling, the deep, gnawing feeling that I was being pulled into something far darker, far more real than I could understand, wouldn't let me. I stared out the window, the city stretching out before me. I had to get answers. I had to find out what was happening, or risk losing myself to whatever was behind those photos. But I had a sinking feeling that I was already too late. The first photo had been just the beginning. The next night, I barely slept at all. My mind kept replaying the images from the photos, those places I couldn't recognize, but somehow knew I'd been in. The figure in the mirror. The eerie emptiness. I couldn't get rid of the feeling that something was following me. Something had attached itself to me, creeping into my waking life. When I finally drifted off, I hoped the dreams would stop. That they'd stay where they belonged, locked in my subconscious. But of course, they didn't. The first thing I noticed when I woke up was the same buzzing sound. My phone was vibrating on the nightstand. I opened my eyes slowly, still tangled in the haze of sleep, trying to shake off the fog. I wasn't ready for what I'd see next. Another photo. It was the same street from before, but now there was something more to it. Something I hadn't noticed last time. The shadows were darker, as if they had a life of their own, and the buildings in the background seemed to lean toward each other, like they were closing in on the street. The air in the photo was thick, heavy, like it was suffocating. I stared at it for a long time, trying to figure out what was wrong, what was different. The figure was back, in the same spot. Just standing there, watching. But now, it was closer. Much closer. The shadow in the distance was becoming clearer, more defined. It looked like it was moving, inching forward with every moment that passed. I could feel my heart begin to race as I dropped the phone onto the bed. My hands were trembling. I had to get up, get moving, do something. I couldn't just sit here, paralyzed by this madness. I paced the room, trying to shake the feeling. I grabbed my jacket from the chair and made my way to the kitchen, hoping that a cup of coffee would clear my head. Anything to get rid of the cold, sinking feeling in my chest. But even as I moved around the apartment, it felt different. The air felt thicker, the silence felt heavier. The walls, the floor, the ceiling, everything seemed just a little bit off. There was something wrong with my surroundings, like they were closing in on me, mirroring the sense of claustrophobia from my dreams. I stood in front of the kitchen counter, trying to calm my nerves as I stared at the coffee machine, but the sound of my phone buzzing again made my heart skip a beat. Slowly, cautiously, I picked it up. Another photo. This time, it was a new place, an old warehouse with rusted metal doors and broken windows. The image looked abandoned, forgotten by time. But there was something about it, the way the shadows stretched across the ground. The photo looked wrong, like it was trying to tell me something, but I couldn't decipher it. And then I saw it. In the far corner of the image, the figure was there again. Closer still. Its form was more defined now. It was tall, unnaturally tall, with long, thin arms that seemed to stretch past its body, as if it were too big for the frame of the photo. Its face was obscured, just a dark shape where features should have been. But the eyes, they were unmistakable. They weren't human. They were cold, unblinking, and hungry. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't want to look at it, but I couldn't stop. The eyes in the photo seemed to be looking directly at me, even though I was thousands of miles away from that place. Even though it was just an image on a screen. I slammed the phone down onto the counter, my hands still shaking. I couldn't breathe. This is insane. This is not real. This isn't happening. But deep down, I knew it was happening. I knew it wasn't just in my head. I stepped away from the kitchen, heart pounding in my chest, trying to keep my mind from spiraling. I needed to leave. I needed to get out of this apartment, away from these photos, away from these dreams. I grabbed my jacket, my keys, and bolted for the door. The city outside was quiet, the streets empty in the early morning hours. The cool air hit my face, but it didn't help. The suffocating feeling still clung to me. I couldn't escape it. No matter how far I went, it was always there. I walked aimlessly, trying to shake off the panic, the anxiety gnawing at my insides. The streetlights flickered as I passed, casting long shadows on the ground. I couldn't escape the feeling that something was watching me. As I turned the corner, my phone buzzed again. This time, I didn't even look at it. I couldn't. It was as if the phone was calling to me, taunting me. I pushed it out of my mind, tried to focus on the sound of my footsteps against the pavement, the rhythm of my breathing. But then, I heard it. A faint whisper. It was a voice I didn't recognize, yet I felt like I had heard it before. It wasn't just in my ears, it was inside my head, a soft murmur that echoed in my mind. Come find me. I froze. I knew I wasn't imagining it. It was as real as the ground beneath my feet, as real as the cold wind that cut through my jacket. Something was out there. Something had been waiting for me. But before I could react, my phone buzzed again. I looked down, terrified of what I might see. But this time, it wasn't a photo. It was a message. You've seen it, haven't you? I stood frozen, staring at the screen of my phone, trying to process the message. You've seen it, haven't you? My fingers trembled as I read it over and over. The words felt like they were drilling into my skull, the question lingering in the air, unanswerable. I couldn't think. Couldn't breathe. The world around me blurred. The faint hum of distant cars, the rustling of leaves in the breeze, all of it became muffled, distant. The whisper in my head still echoed, "Come find me." I felt a shiver crawl up my spine, the skin on the back of my neck prickling as if something cold was inching closer, closer, closer. I turned in a panic, scanning the street. But there was nothing, no one. Just the empty night stretching endlessly before me. This isn't real. The thought clawed at my mind. I had to be dreaming. I had to be. There was no other explanation. I had fallen asleep while walking. But my heart was pounding in my chest, and the sweat on my palms told me this was no dream. A small part of me, the logical part, told me to calm down, to think this through. But the other part, the one that had been drowning in fear since the photos first appeared, kept pushing me forward, urging me to run. I did what I thought was best. I turned and began walking faster, my pace quickening as I tried to outrun the feeling of dread that had settled over me like a heavy cloak. But the street felt wrong. The shadows seemed to stretch longer with each step I took. The buildings, the alleyways, they all started to blur together. The world around me was distorting, warping in subtle, unnerving ways. Then, just as I turned another corner, I heard something that made my stomach churn. A faint scraping noise, like nails against metal. It was distant at first, but it grew louder with each passing second, until it was as if the sound was right behind me, following me. I whipped around, but there was nothing there. Just empty streets. The sound stopped abruptly, leaving nothing but the sickening stillness in its wake. My breath came in ragged gasps, my chest tight with panic. The air around me felt heavy, as if it was pressing in from all sides, suffocating me. I fumbled for my phone again, desperate to reach out, to find some sense of reality, some anchor in this madness. But as I pulled it from my pocket, my screen went black. The phone was dead. No. No, no, no. I frantically tried to power it back on, pressing the button over and over, but nothing happened. The battery couldn't have just died, could it? I had to keep moving. I had to get away from the feeling of being watched, from the creeping sense that something was just behind me, waiting to pounce. With a glance over my shoulder, I broke into a run, my footsteps echoing against the pavement, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. But the faster I ran, the more the world around me seemed to shift. The buildings blurred again, and the streets grew unfamiliar, twisted. Every turn I made felt like I was running in circles. I was lost. I could feel my pulse thundering in my ears as I rounded a corner and found myself in front of an old, abandoned building. It was a place I didn't recognize, and yet something about it felt familiar. It felt like I had been here before, like I had walked these same steps in a dream. The windows were shattered, the door slightly ajar, swinging in the wind with an eerie creak. I stood frozen for a moment, my mind reeling with fear. But I couldn't stop myself. I was drawn to it, compelled to go inside. Something was calling me from within. The whispering voice in my head urged me forward. Come find me. I took a step closer to the door, my legs trembling beneath me. My hand hovered over the handle, but before I could touch it, the door swung open on its own, revealing nothing but darkness inside. I stood at the threshold, staring into the pitch-black void. The air that came from within was cold, too cold for a summer night. It smelled like decay, like something had been left to rot for years. The voice in my head was louder now, more urgent. Come inside. You have to see. I stepped over the threshold, my heart pounding in my chest. As soon as I entered, the door slammed shut behind me with a force that rattled the walls. I jumped, my breath catching in my throat as I whipped around, but there was no sign of the door. It had vanished, as if it had never existed. I was trapped. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. I needed to stay calm. I needed to focus. But the fear was overwhelming. The shadows inside the building seemed to move, shifting and undulating as if they had a life of their own. The air was thick, stifling, and it felt like something was pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. And then, through the darkness, I saw it. A faint, flickering light in the distance. A single, dim bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting long shadows across the cracked, stained walls. I took a hesitant step toward it, my every nerve on edge, waiting for something to jump out, to grab me, to pull me into the depths of the darkness. But as I got closer, I saw something else. A photograph, taped to the wall right under the light. I recognized it immediately. It was the same streak from the first photo. But now, something was different. The figure was closer. Much closer. And it was looking directly at the camera. It knows I'm here. I recoiled in horror as the realization hit me. This photo wasn't just a memory. It was a warning. And I was trapped inside it. I couldn't breathe. The photo on the wall, that haunting image of the street, my street, stared back at me, the figure in the foreground now unnervingly close. It was as if the person in the photo had been watching me all along, waiting for me to find them. My heart hammered in my chest, the panic rising like a tidal wave, crashing against my mind. How is this possible? I kept asking myself, the words spinning in my head. This couldn't be real. None of it could be. And yet, every part of me felt the weight of the moment. Each breath I took, each step forward or backward, carried the unmistakable sense of impending doom. The photograph flickered under the dim light, casting a ghostly shadow on the wall, its figure inching closer still. I stumbled back, my hands shaking violently as I reached for my phone again, desperate for any kind of connection, any sign of normalcy. But the screen remained black, the device lifeless in my trembling fingers. Think. I turned back to the photo. The figure in the picture, it was no longer a figure. It was an outline. A shape that seemed to move, bending unnaturally as if being pulled by some invisible force. And then it shifted. I saw it move. The figure raised its head, its face no longer a blur of indistinguishable features. It was a face that wasn't a stranger to me. It was the face from my dreams, the one I had seen so many times, standing just beyond the edge of my consciousness. The one I could never fully remember when I woke up. It's real. This is real. A cold wave of terror washed over me. My throat tightened, my heart nearly stopping as my feet refused to move. I wanted to scream, but the air in the room felt thick and heavy, choking my voice. My mind was screaming at me to run, to get away, but my body betrayed me, frozen in place as I stared at that face, its eyes, those dark, hollow eyes, now fixed on me with an intensity one couldn't escape. A sound broke the silence, quiet at first, like the soft scrape of fingernails against wood. It came from deeper within the building, from somewhere behind the walls. The sound grew louder, more distinct, now a rhythmic scratching, as if something, or someone, was trying to claw its way through. I turned my head toward the source of the noise, my body refusing to cooperate, every instinct telling me to look away. But I couldn't. The scratching continued, growing louder, more frantic, as if whatever was behind the wall was desperate to get out. Desperate to reach me. I felt a shiver crawl down my spine, and I knew it was coming closer. Whatever was in that wall, it was getting closer. Then, the noise stopped abruptly. Total silence. My breath caught in my throat. My mind screamed for me to run, to get out, but my legs felt like they were glued to the floor. The fear was suffocating, paralyzing. But then, the silence was broken by a voice. A whisper, barely audible, but unmistakable. "Come find me. I've been waiting." The words were cold, hollow, as if they were being spoken through a thick layer of fog. They echoed around the room, filling the empty space with a sense of dread so palpable I could almost taste it. I spun around, looking for the source, but the room was empty, the shadows long and twisting, mocking me with their emptiness. Then it hit me. The walls. The walls were moving. They were shifting. At first, it was subtle, a faint ripple, like water moving under a thin layer of ice. But it became undeniable as I watched the cracks in the walls grow wider, splitting like a wound that was bleeding darkness. The room was changing. No, it wasn't the room, it was me. I was changing. The photograph on the wall seemed to pull me in, its flickering light growing stronger, its edges blurring and distorting, just like the shifting walls. My hand trembled as I reached toward it, my fingers nearly touching the cold, cracked surface. Then the light snapped off. Everything went black. I blinked, disoriented, trying to adjust to the sudden darkness. I was no longer in the room, no longer standing in front of the wall with the photo. The air smelled different, stale, damp. I couldn't tell where I was, but I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't alone. I turned slowly, trying to get a sense of my surroundings. I was in a hallway now, a narrow, dimly lit corridor that stretched endlessly in both directions. The walls were lined with old, peeling wallpaper, the edges frayed and torn. The floor creaked under my weight, the sound echoing around me like a warning. I was back in the building, but now everything felt different, alive, almost. The air was thick with an oppressive heaviness, like the building itself was watching me, listening. And then, just as the panic started to rise again, I saw it. A figure, standing at the far end of the hallway. It was impossible to make out any details at first, the figure shrouded in darkness. But then, it stepped into the light, revealing a face I recognized. A face that had been in the photographs. The same eyes. The same hollow gaze. The same twisted, half-smile. "You came," it whispered. I felt my blood run cold. "Now, it's your turn." The floor beneath me cracked open. The ground gave way, and I fell into the dark, endless void. I woke up gasping for air, my body drenched in sweat. My phone, my cursed phone, was beside me, vibrating violently on the nightstand. With shaking hands, I reached for it. There it was. Another photo. It was my face. But I wasn't smiling. And I wasn't alone. The figure stood behind me. I stared at the photo, the edges of the image trembling in my vision. The figure behind me, it couldn't be real. I turned around, half expecting to see something in the room with me, but the space was empty. There was nothing there. Nothing except the heavy, suffocating silence. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, drowning out every other sound, and I was sure I could hear my breath rasping as I gasped for air. I had to get out. I had to run. But where? Where could I possibly go when the nightmare was following me, inching closer with each passing second? I quickly shoved the phone into my pocket, my fingers still trembling from the dread that had completely overtaken me. My legs felt weak, my body unwilling to move, but I forced myself up from the bed. I needed to breathe. I needed to get out of this suffocating room. The walls felt like they were closing in on me, the air thick with a sense of impending doom. I stumbled into the hallway, every creak of the floorboard beneath my feet echoing in the stillness. The house, or whatever this place was, seemed wrong. It didn't feel like my own home anymore. There was no warmth, no familiarity, just cold shadows and a sense that something unseen was lurking just beyond the corner of my perception, waiting for the right moment to strike. I pushed forward, my steps echoing off the walls as I moved down the narrow corridor. The house was unfamiliar, the layout strange, There were no pictures on the walls, no family portraits or photographs like the ones I'd seen earlier. Everything was blank, sterile. My thoughts kept circling back to the image on my phone, the photo of me with that figure standing behind me. How was this possible? Was it some kind of hallucination? A trick of my mind? No, it couldn't be. I had seen it, felt it. There was no explanation for it, no logical reason why it was happening. And that terrified me more than anything else. I reached the end of the hallway and turned the corner. My breath caught in my throat as I saw it, the door slightly ajar, the faintest light flickering from within. The same light from my dream. The same distorted flicker that had followed me from the moment I'd first found the photos. I could feel the pull of it, the way it beckoned me with a silent promise. A promise I couldn't ignore, no matter how hard I tried. I reached out, my hand trembling as it touched the cool, warm wood of the door. I hesitated. What was waiting for me in there? The moment I pushed the door open, a wave of coldness washed over me, and I stepped inside. The room was dim, lit only by the flickering light that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. It was empty, except for one thing. The wall. It was covered in photographs. Hundreds, maybe thousands of them, all pinned haphazardly to the surface. Some of the pictures were blurry, others distorted, but all of them were of places I had never seen before: vast, empty streets, dense forests, dark alleyways, and some were familiar. They were places I had visited once, long ago. Places I had thought I'd forgotten. And in every single photo, there was a figure. The same figure. The same hollow eyes. The same twisted, impossible smile. It was there, in every photograph. Watching. Waiting. A sudden chill ran through me, and I staggered back, my hands scrambling to find something to steady myself. The photographs seemed to move, the figures within them shifting, as if they were aware of my presence. I could feel their eyes on me, heavy, suffocating. I backed away, but the door slammed shut behind me with a force that rattled the entire room. My pulse spiked. I spun around, desperate for a way out, but the room was closing in. The walls seemed to pulse with a life of their own, the photos on the wall beginning to move. No, not move. Shift. The images changed, slowly at first, until they were no longer photographs of places, but scenes from my own life. There I was, sitting at my kitchen table, my hands gripping a cup of coffee. There I was, walking down the street, glancing over my shoulder. The images twisted, showing moments I had no memory of, moments that hadn't happened yet. The figure appeared in every one. Always behind me. Always in the background. It's not real. It's not real, I repeated, trying to convince myself, but the room, the walls, they were closing in. I heard a sound, faint but unmistakable, a whisper. "You're mine now." I whirled around, but there was no one there. I was alone. Or was I? The whisper came again, this time louder, as if it was right beside me, in my ear. "Come closer. You've seen too much. Now you must join us." The room shifted again, and the photos on the wall began to show the exact moment I had stepped into this room, the moment I had first opened the door. I saw myself, wide-eyed, frozen in terror, staring at the photographs that were now closing in around me. And in every single one, the figure grew closer. Its eyes, those eyes, locked onto mine. I have to get out. I had to. But the door, there was no door anymore. The walls had sealed me in, leaving me with nothing but the endless, suffocating dark. The floor began to shake beneath me, and I stumbled backward, my breath ragged. And then, there it was again. The whisper. You belong here. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. My vision blurred, the edges of the room dissolving into darkness, and I realized, too late, that the photographs had stopped changing. They were still. They were static. But not the one in the center. The one with me in it. The figure wasn't in the background anymore. It was standing right in front of me. And it smiled. I woke up with a start, gasping for air, drenched in sweat. The room was silent. No photographs. No shadows. No whispers. But my phone was buzzing again. Another picture. This time, it was of the room I had just left. The same walls, the same floor, the same door. And standing in the middle of the room was a figure. The same one. And I knew, deep down, I was already too late. I had always been someone who used music as an escape. The world felt too loud sometimes, and I needed something to drown it out. The hum of everyday life, the noise of my thoughts, it all faded away when I could immerse myself in a melody, a rhythm. I had just downloaded a new playlist, one I found from an obscure online site, with some new indie tracks I'd never heard before. The kind of music you listen to and instantly feel like it speaks to you, like the artists are telling your story. I put on my headphones and pressed play. The sound washed over me, warm and familiar. The bass was deep, the guitar strummed sharp, the vocals clear, each note perfectly placed. I let myself sink into it, closing my eyes as the music filled my head. It felt like the rest of the world was slipping away. That was until it happened. A whisper. At first, I thought it was part of the song. Maybe a quiet vocal line I hadn't noticed before. But no! I was certain this wasn't part of the track. It was too close, too distinct. I yanked the headphones off my ears, half expecting to hear the sound of someone nearby. But no one was there. I looked around my apartment, quiet. Nothing out of place. The walls were the same beige they'd always been, the clutter on the coffee table still untouched. I felt a cold shiver down my spine as I put the headphones back on. I hit play again. The music continued. But this time, the whisper came louder, clearer. Jack. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. That was my name. I pulled the headphones off again, this time in a rush. My mind raced. How could this be happening? I had downloaded the tracks myself, nothing unusual about the files. I checked the playlist. The same songs. The same sound. Was I imagining it? I didn't think so. My pulse was too fast. My hands too shaky. The whispers were still in my ears. They didn't come from the speakers. They didn't come from anything I could identify. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a trick of the sound, I thought. Maybe there was an audio glitch, some corrupted part of the file? But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. This felt too real, too intentional. I paused the music and tried to steady myself. I checked the headphones, nothing seemed off. They were just regular earbuds, not some fancy Bluetooth headset or augmented sound system. There was no microphone built into them. No way for anything to be broadcasting noises into my ears. And yet, I could still hear the whisper. Faintly. Softly. But it was there. Jack. I turned quickly, the hairs on my neck standing up. The apartment was still. The world outside my headphones remained silent. I let out a shaky breath. What was going on? I glanced at my phone screen, hoping for an answer, but there was nothing. Just a playlist. I swiped through the songs, staring at the familiar album covers. Each one was normal. Each one was mundane. No hidden files. No strange files. No mysterious recordings. Then it came again, closer this time. The whisper was louder, clearer. Jack. You're not alone, asterisk. The blood drained from my face. My hands felt clammy. I tried to push away the thought. It wasn't real. It couldn't be. Maybe it was a prank. Someone messing with me. But who? How? I could feel the panic starting to set in, creeping up my spine. I yanked the headphones off again and threw them onto the couch. My breathing grew shallow, uneven. I stood up and paced around the small living room, trying to collect myself. I couldn't get rid of the feeling, though, something was wrong. And it wasn't just in my head. I looked at the headphones on the couch, sitting innocently. They hadn't changed. They were just headphones. But what if they weren't? The thought struck me like a bolt of lightning. Could something have tampered with them? Could there have been some hidden device or glitch that I didn't know about? Was someone controlling the sound that was coming through them? Or worse, was something inside the music? I turned back to the phone. I needed to check the tracks again, verify everything. Maybe something had gotten into the files, something that shouldn't be there. I opened the music app, scrolled through the playlist, tapped on a track, and watched as it started to play. But there was no whisper this time. Only the music. I let out a breath of relief. I wasn't crazy. At least, not completely. But just as I was about to turn off the phone and walk away, it happened again. A low, almost imperceptible hiss followed by the unmistakable voice. Jack. I'm here. The voice seemed to drip into my ears like syrup, slow and deliberate, seeping into my mind. And I knew this wasn't normal. I was hearing something outside of the music. Something trying to get to me. I jumped up, ripping the headphones off once more. But it wasn't enough. The sound, the whisper, it was still in my head. And that's when the real fear hit me. I wasn't just hearing it from the headphones anymore. I could hear it everywhere. I could hear it inside my own mind. It was coming for me. I scrambled for the door, my hands fumbling with the doorknob, desperate to escape the pressure that was building inside my skull. The whisper continued. Clearer now. More confident. You can't run, Jack. I know where you are. You're not getting away from me. And it was true. I wasn't alone. Not anymore. I stumbled out into the hallway, my legs unsteady beneath me. The air in the apartment felt thick, like it was pressing in on me from all sides. I couldn't breathe properly. My chest was tight, my heart racing. I tried to tell myself it was all in my head, that the whisper was just some trick, some glitch, something that made sense. But nothing about it felt normal. Nothing about it felt like it was coming from any place real. I reached for my phone again, my hands trembling. I needed to make sure everything was okay. I needed to prove to myself that I wasn't losing it. But the moment my fingers touched the screen, I froze. There was a notification. A new message from an unknown number. I opened it, fingers shaking, hoping that whatever it was would make sense. But it didn't. It was just a string of strange characters, symbols that I couldn't read, that made no sense at all. The message itself was so garbled, it might as well have been an error code. Then I saw something else. A photo attachment. It was a blurry image, hard to make out at first. But as I stared at it, my blood went cold. It was a picture of me. Me, sitting in my living room, the exact same spot I had just been, except I had no memory of this photo being taken. The angle was off, as though it was taken from behind me. I couldn't remember seeing anyone there. I didn't hear any footsteps. No camera click. It was as if the image had materialized out of thin air. Ow! I didn't even know how to respond to this. I was paralyzed with fear, my mind spinning in confusion. Was this some sick joke? Had someone been watching me? But no, this felt different. There was something in that photo, something off, unnatural. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it felt like the photo itself was mocking me, taunting me. The whisper came again. Closer this time. I told you, Jack. You can't hide from me. I slammed my phone onto the couch, the glass screen cracking slightly. The voice, it wasn't just a whisper anymore. It was louder, more solid, like it was coming from right behind me. I spun around, but the room was empty. The lights flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch farther than they should have. The walls seemed to close in on me. My head throbbed, as though the space itself was pressing down on my thoughts. I tried to stay calm, taking a few deep breaths, but the whispering kept coming. It was in my head, outside my head, like a buzzing in my skull, relentless. I wanted to cover my ears, but the noise didn't stop. It had become part of me, woven into the fabric of everything I could hear and feel. Stop. Just stop. I shouted into the empty room, but the sound was swallowed by the thick silence. It's real, I thought. Whatever this is, it's real. I was being hunted. And whatever was doing this, it wasn't going to stop. I grabbed my coat, not thinking. The door was still wide open, and the night outside was pitch black, the streetlights casting eerie halos on the pavement. I ran. My feet slapped against the cold concrete, heart thudding in my chest. But no matter how far I ran, I couldn't escape the feeling that something was with me. I ran for what felt like hours, through streets I didn't recognize, turning corners, crossing unfamiliar intersections, my breath coming in short gasps. I didn't care where I was. I didn't care how far I went. All that mattered was getting away from the voice that was following me. But it was still there, in the back of my mind, that whispering presence, like a shadow that refused to leave. You can't run from me, Jack. I stopped in my tracks. The voice wasn't in my head anymore. It was coming from somewhere else. Somewhere close. I glanced around frantically, trying to locate the source, but the streets were empty. The only sound was the distant hum of traffic, the occasional rustle of wind. The voice sounded clearer now, sharper, like it was no longer in my ears but inside my skull, like it had taken root there. I know where you are. I couldn't take it anymore. I turned around, retracing my steps, heading back to the apartment. I had to. I had to face whatever this was. But the closer I got, the more suffocating the air became. It was as though the city around me had turned into a hollow shell, empty and closed off. The buildings towered over me, casting dark shadows that felt too deep, too empty. My footsteps echoed unnervingly in the silence. Each one felt like a countdown to something. When I reached my apartment, the door was ajar. I hadn't left it that way. I stepped inside cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. The apartment was dark, the same stillness hanging in the air. The light flickered again, casting strange shapes across the walls. I felt like I was being watched, but not by anyone I could see. It was as though the space itself was alive, aware of me, waiting for me to make the next move. The whispers, they were louder now, growing insistent. "You came back, Jack. You should have stayed away." I froze in the doorway. I wasn't alone. The shadows in the corner of the room shifted, moving unnaturally. They weren't just shadows, they were something else. I couldn't see them clearly, but I felt them. Their presence. It was overwhelming. It was everywhere. And then, for the first time, I understood. The whispers weren't just voices. They were calling me. Something was here, something that had been hiding in the darkness, something that was using the music to find me. The shadows moved again. And this time, they were coming for me. My breath caught in my throat as I took a step back, my body moving on autopilot. The shadows in the corner were stretching, growing longer, swirling in a way that didn't make sense, like ink bleeding into water. They were alive. I couldn't comprehend it, couldn't make sense of what was happening, but the fear, the cold, suffocating fear, was undeniable. I tried to back away, but my legs felt like lead. The whispers were getting louder now, swirling around me, crashing into my skull. They weren't just words anymore. They were screams, desperate, guttural, as if they were clawing at my mind. "You can't run from us, Jack." The shadows moved again, snapping me out of my frozen state. They weren't just in the corner anymore. They were all over the room, crawling along the walls, creeping across the floor, twisting and writhing like tendrils of some terrible creature. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. My mind was a blur, racing with terror. I had to escape. But how? I turned, stumbling toward the door. The apartment felt smaller now, tighter, as though the walls were closing in on me, pushing me toward the shadows. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, until it felt like they were in my ears, in my head, shaking my sanity. "It's not real. It's not real. It's just in my head." But the door wouldn't open. I pulled at the handle, yanked it with all my strength, but it didn't budge. I spun around, eyes wide, searching for any way out. The room was wrong. The lights were flickering wildly now, casting long, distorted shapes across the walls, making the shadows dance and ripple like water. The apartment wasn't just an apartment anymore, it was alive. Suddenly, something sharp grazed my arm. I flinched and turned, but there was nothing there. Nothing but the shadows. The whispers intensified. "We're here, Jack. We've always been here." I backed into the corner, my heart hammering in my chest. The shadows were reaching for me, their dark tendrils creeping toward me with a slow, deliberate pace. I was trapped. A sharp pain shot through my head, like 1,000 needles were being driven into my skull. I cried out in agony, my hands pressed to my temples, trying to block out the noise, but it wouldn't stop. The whispers were no longer whispers, they were voices, deep, guttural, overlapping, each one calling my name, drowning me in sound. Jack. 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 The shadows were so close now. They were inches away, reaching out to grab me, to pull me into the dark. I felt the air grow cold, biting, like ice sinking into my skin. I could feel them, feel their presence, their weight, pressing down on me. A sudden thought cut through the panic, the headphones. The music. I had to take them off. I had to get rid of them. With trembling hands, I yanked the headphones from my ears, desperate to silence the whispers, to break the connection between the dark and me. I ripped the cord out of my phone, throwing it to the floor with a deafening thud. The moment I did, the whispers stopped. For a moment, everything was still. The shadows halted, the voices faded into silence. The room, for a brief instant, felt normal again. But it wasn't real. I knew it wasn't real. I couldn't trust it. But then, I heard something else. A soft tapping. Faint, but there. I turned slowly, dread building in my chest. The tapping came again, this time louder. It wasn't coming from the shadows. It was coming from outside. I didn't move. I didn't want to move. I didn't want to see what was waiting for me. But the tapping continued. The door, the one that was locked just a moment ago, wasn't closed anymore. It was ajar. Just a crack. Without thinking, I rushed to the door, my body moving faster than my mind could process. I threw it open, heart pounding in my throat, and nothing. The hallway was empty. No one. No shadows. No whispers. Just the dim, flickering light of the overhead bulb casting eerie reflections across the walls. But something felt wrong. The air was colder than it should have been. There was a heaviness to it. Like the space was saturated with something I couldn't see. And then I heard it again. The tapping. But now, it wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from within the apartment. Behind me. I spun around so fast, I almost lost my balance. My breath came in short, sharp gasps, eyes wide with terror. There was no way I could have missed it. The sound was too loud, too clear. It was coming from the shadows, from the dark corners of the room. The tapping turned into scratching, like claws on wood, scraping, slow and deliberate. I couldn't see anything. I couldn't make sense of it. But I felt it, felt the movement in the air, the way the darkness shifted. Something was waiting. Something was moving in the dark, circling me. We told you, Jack. I took a step back, my body shaking. The shadows began to stretch, their forms twisting, like they were alive, like they were coming for me. I had no choice. I had to run. I turned and sprinted down the hallway, desperate to escape, but the moment my feet hit the stairs, I felt a sudden weight, like something was pulling at me, dragging me back toward the darkness. I couldn't stop. I couldn't fight it. But no matter how fast I ran, no matter how hard I tried to escape, the whispers followed. And I knew, deep down, that I was being chased by something that wasn't just inside my head. It was real. And it wasn't going to let me go. I stumbled down the staircase, my shoes slapping against the cold floor as I sprinted, my heart thudding in my chest. Every step I took felt like it was pulling me deeper into the nightmare, as if the very ground beneath me was conspiring to trap me. The whispers, those God-forsaken whispers, echoed in my mind, a maddening crescendo of distorted voices, all of them screaming my name, calling me back. Jack, come back, you can't escape. It wasn't just in my ears anymore. The voices were inside my head, clawing at my thoughts, drowning me in terror. I couldn't think straight. My breath was coming in ragged gasps, and my legs felt like they were made of lead. But I couldn't stop. I had to get out. The front door. That's where I had to go. I needed to get to the street, to safety, to someplace where the shadows couldn't follow. I slammed into the door, pushing with all my strength, but it didn't open. It was stuck. The lock was jammed. No. No, no, no. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with the handle, pulling at it with desperate force, but the door wouldn't move. Panic surged through me, my pulse racing faster than I could control. I glanced around, my eyes darting to the dark corners of the room, but there was nothing there. The shadows were still, but waiting. The silence was suffocating, thick, like a blanket smothering me. I had no idea how long I had been running, how much time had passed. It felt like everything had stretched into an eternal moment of terror. I looked down at my phone, my hands trembling as I pulled it from my pocket. Maybe I could call for help. I had to. But when I unlocked the screen, my breath caught in my throat. The music was still playing. The playlist I downloaded just hours ago, the one that had started all of this, was still there. The track list scrolled in front of me, but there was something else. A new track. It was a single, long file, sitting at the very top of the list. I didn't download it. I didn't even recognize it. The file name was nothing but a series of random, nonsensical characters. I felt a chill race up my spine. I tapped it, despite my better judgment. It started playing immediately, no delay. But instead of the usual music, a low, guttural voice filled the speakers, echoing around me. The voice wasn't singing, wasn't speaking, it was whispering, so soft and intimate that it sent a shiver down my spine. Jack. My blood ran cold. It was the same voice I'd heard in the apartment, distorted, guttural, but unmistakable. I could hear it, clear as day, coming from the tiny speakers in my phone. It was real. I yanked the headphones out of my ears, dropping them to the floor. But the voice didn't stop. It kept whispering, insistent, patient, as if it was waiting for me to listen, to surrender. You can't run from me, Jack. We're connected now. You've always been ours. The words made no sense, but they were so deeply unsettling, I could feel my stomach twist. I looked down at the phone, my fingers numb with fear. The music had stopped. The file had disappeared, leaving nothing but an empty screen. I glanced around, half expecting something to leap out of the darkness at me. But it was silent again, too silent. The world around me felt suffocating, like the air itself had thickened, pressing down on me, making it harder to breathe. I had to leave. I grabbed the door handle again, twisting it with all my might, and this time it gave. The door swung open with a soft creak, and I stumbled out into the hallway, my mind racing. But before I could take a single step toward freedom, I froze. There was a sound behind me. A quiet, scraping noise, like nails on a chalkboard. It was coming from inside the apartment, from behind me. I slowly turned my head, my stomach churning. The shadows had moved. No longer confined to the corners, they were now shifting, sliding along the walls like dark liquid pooling across the floor. The shapes, figures, were forming within them, distorting into something vaguely humanoid. Tall, thin, stretching to impossible heights. The shadows seemed to reach for me with long, skeletal fingers. The scratching continued, louder now. It wasn't just the shadows. It was the walls, scratching, groaning, bending. It was as if the very apartment was coming to life, trying to swallow me whole. I felt it again, the pull. That strange, undeniable force dragging me back toward the darkness. I stepped back, my mind a whirl of panic. But there was nowhere to go. The hallway behind me stretched into infinite darkness. The walls seemed to close in. The more I tried to move away, the more the shadows seemed to reach, to claw their way toward me. Jack. The voice came again, soft, in my ear this time, and I could feel it, hear it, just behind me, like someone was standing right there, breathing down my neck. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. There was no one there, except the shadows. I could barely make out the shapes anymore, but I could feel them. They were everywhere. Their presence was suffocating, their shapes indistinct yet so real that I could feel them pressing in on me. Jack. The whisper wasn't in my ear anymore. It was coming from inside my mind, from the deepest corners of my thoughts. I wasn't sure if it was real anymore or if I was losing my mind, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, hunted. And then, as if in answer to my fear, the door slammed shut behind me. I was trapped. The door had slammed shut with a force I didn't think possible. My heart pounded in my chest as I turned, trying to pull it open, but it wouldn't budge. The walls seemed to press in tighter, the air growing thick with an unnatural humidity. Panic clawed at my throat, but I couldn't let it consume me, not yet. I pulled at the handle again, harder this time, my whole body trembling, but still nothing. I looked around in desperation, searching for an escape, any exit, but the hallway was a labyrinth of shadows. The familiar creaks of the old building now felt like heavy footsteps, following me, mocking me. And then it happened. From the darkness ahead, I heard it again, that voice. It came from nowhere and everywhere at once. So close, I could feel the breath on the back of my neck, though I knew no one was there. The words were soft, haunting, just above a whisper. Jack, don't try to leave. The chill of those words wrapped around me like cold fingers. I froze, the blood draining from my face. I wasn't alone. I wasn't safe. You can't run from what you've started, the voice continued, and this time it sounded almost pleased, as if it had been waiting for me to realize the truth. I spun around, my eyes scanning every inch of the hallway. The shadows were no longer just stretching, they were alive. They moved like liquid, creeping across the floor, slithering up the walls. I could see them, dark figures with long, grotesque limbs, shifting and merging into one another like some nightmarish tide. There was no mistaking it now. Whatever this was, it was coming for me. The floor beneath me groaned, a low rumble as if the building itself was shifting, warping, twisting into something else. The walls stretched, elongated, reaching towards the ceiling. Every angle seemed to bend, distorting the space around me. The hallway I had once known so well, where I had lived for years, was no longer the same. It was a different place. It felt wrong. The very fabric of reality seemed to be unraveling before my eyes. I took a step backward, the shadows creeping closer. And then, just as suddenly as the darkness had appeared, I heard something else. A soft, almost inaudible sound. A tapping. Not from behind, but from somewhere in front of me. It was rhythmic, deliberate. Tap. 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 I turned towards the source, my breath shallow, my heart hammering in my chest. The sound was coming from the end of the hallway. It was like the tapping of fingernails against wood, rapid and methodical, each tap sending a jolt through my already frayed nerves. It was closer now. I could hear it clearly, and it was unmistakable. Someone, or something, was moving towards me. The shadows began to pull back, almost like they were retreating, making way for whatever was coming. I tried to move, to run, but my body wouldn't obey. It felt like the air was thick with some invisible force, holding me in place. Then, the tapping stopped, and I heard a voice. Jack. It was low, familiar, a voice I had heard countless times before, and yet it was twisted, wrong. It had no warmth, no human quality left in it. It was something else, something that wasn't supposed to be. I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened, and my legs gave way beneath me. I fell to my knees, my vision blurring, the darkness closing in. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped my mouth. I tried to move, but my body was frozen in place, locked in the grip of whatever was stalking me. You're ours now, the voice said again, and this time it wasn't just one voice. It was multiple voices, overlapping, each one sounding like a different version of me, of the world I had known. My phone buzzed in my pocket. The sudden noise cut through the tension like a knife, and I jumped, a sharp gasp escaping my lips. My heart was a drumbeat in my ears, louder than anything else. I reached into my pocket with trembling hands and pulled out the phone. The screen was dark, as if it had turned off by itself, but then it flickered. A new notification appeared. No, not a notification, an incoming call. The number was unknown. My thumb hovered over the screen, and for a split second, I thought about answering it. I didn't. But the call didn't stop. The screen flickered again, and the call came through once more. Jack. The voice. It was there, coming through the phone now, echoing in my ears, not from the headphones, but directly from the device, clear and sharp. And then it clicked. It wasn't just the whispers in the headphones. It wasn't just the shadows in the hallway. The whole world was connected to it. My phone. The music. The app one had downloaded. It had all been a gateway, a link. Whatever had been whispering to me, whatever was hunting me, it was in everything. In my phone, in the walls, in the very air I breathed. And I had invited it in. The call didn't stop. I couldn't hang up. I couldn't escape. It felt like the walls were closing in on me again, like something was rushing at me from the dark corners of my mind. It was everywhere. Then, the screen went black. The tapping returned. This time, it was right next to me. I turned to face the shadow at my side. There was no escaping now. I had set my alarm for 7 a.m. At least, I thought I did. The kind of mundane, routine task you do without thinking twice, almost mechanical. It was a regular Thursday night, the kind that promised nothing more than the usual slow crawl into the weekend. I had been lying in bed, eyes closed, surrounded by the stillness of my room. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen was the only sound that filled the silence. My mind wandered, the day's events already slipping away, blending with the night's calm. But then, the phone beside my bed buzzed. I ignored it at first. I was tired, exhausted from the never-ending grind of life. But then it buzzed again. And again. Confused, I reached for it. The screen lit up, illuminating my face. A quick glance at the time showed it was 3:13 a.m. That's why I saw it. The notification. Wake up. He's already here. My heart dropped. My fingers trembled as I stared at the message. My alarm wasn't supposed to go off for another few hours, yet here it was, a notification an hour that made no sense, from a source I didn't recognize. I wasn't sure if I should laugh it off or be genuinely terrified. It felt like a sick joke. Who would send something like this? And why now? I sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake, the comfort of sleep ripped away from me. I checked the phone settings, only to confirm that the alarm was indeed set for 7 a.m. Nothing had changed. The message, though, lingered in my thoughts like a shadow I couldn't shake. Who was he? And why did I need to wake up? A dull thud echoed from the hallway outside my bedroom. The house was quiet, far too quiet for that time of night. My stomach churned, my skin prickled with unease. The air in my room felt thicker now, as though it was pressing in on me. I stood up and moved to the door, cautiously opening it, expecting to see nothing. Nothing but darkness. The hallway was still, the only light coming from the faint glow of a street lamp outside the window. I listened. The house seemed empty. But then came the sound again, a low, rhythmic tapping, like something or someone moving in the next room. I froze. Was it just my imagination? My heart raced as I peered down the hallway. Nothing. The tapping had stopped. I told myself to go back to bed, to forget about the message, to ignore the strange feeling building inside me. But I couldn't. Something wasn't right. The quiet of the house, the odd message, the tapping, everything felt off. I closed the door softly behind me and sat back down on the bed, the phone still clutched in my hand. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. Maybe it was just some strange glitch, I thought. A prank. Maybe I had just imagined the tapping. But as I looked at the screen again, my stomach dropped. The notification had changed. He's coming. You can't escape. I blinked. The text was clear. Too clear. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a glitch. Whoever, or whatever, was on the other side of the phone knew something I didn't. And they were trying to make sure I knew it too. The tapping started again, louder this time, closer. It was in the room now. I stood up. Panic surged through me. I glanced at the door, my feet unwilling to move, paralyzed by the sound and the weight of the moment. And then I heard it. A low, raspy breath. Behind me. My heart slammed in my chest. I turned around quickly, but there was nothing there. Nothing but shadows. And the growing sense that I wasn't alone anymore. I couldn't breathe. The air around me felt thick, suffocating, as though the walls themselves were closing in. My eyes darted around the room, looking for something, anything, that would make sense of the situation. But there was nothing. Just the shadows, stretching in ways they shouldn't. I moved instinctively, walking slowly toward the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the handle. But before I could even touch it, the phone buzzed again. I jumped, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't want to look at it. I didn't want to see what more it had to say. But I couldn't resist. My fingers hovered over the screen, then, reluctantly, I opened the message. He's closer now. You don't know him, but he knows you. My head spun. I turned away from the phone, my breath shallow. Who could send these messages? What did they mean? I wasn't sure if I was more terrified of the words or the fact that they seemed to know something I didn't. I couldn't stop myself from glancing at the hallway again. The tapping had stopped, but I swore I could still feel something in the air, an unease that didn't belong. My feet moved without my consent. I stepped toward the door, hand resting on the cold metal handle, my breath catching in my throat. I shouldn't open the door. I shouldn't even step outside. But there was something drawing me, a force I couldn't explain. I turned the handle slowly, but before I could push the door open, I heard it again, the sound that had made my blood run cold, a rasping breath. It was coming from behind me, soft and shallow, but unmistakable. I spun around, heart racing. The shadows in the room were darker now, like they had shifted in response to the sound. Something was there. Something I couldn't see. Then, just as quickly as the breath had started, it stopped. Silence. I blinked rapidly, trying to clear my mind. Maybe it was my imagination. Maybe the stress of the day was getting to me. Maybe there was nothing in the room. But my instincts told me otherwise. I backed up, slowly, my eyes scanning the shadows, the corners of the room, anywhere that something might be lurking. Then, the phone buzzed again. The message was waiting for me. He's not just watching you. He's waiting. I felt the air grow heavier, pressing down on me. My heart hammered in my chest. My hands shook as I dropped the phone, suddenly unable to hold it. I couldn't take it anymore. I stepped backward into the corner of the room, my back pressed against the wall. My mind raced, trying to piece together what was happening. Who was sending these messages? Was it someone I knew? Or was this something else? I wanted to leave. I needed to leave. But I couldn't. Something inside me told me that if I opened the door, whatever was waiting on the other side would get me. The presence behind me felt real, like a weight in the room, like it was slowly closing in. I could hear my own breath, shallow and erratic. And then, a low creaking sound broke the silence, coming from the far corner of the room, behind the closet. My eyes locked on that corner. I could see the shadows shifting, almost as though they were moving on their own. I wanted to scream, but my throat felt tight, my voice swallowed by the terror that clawed at me. I could feel it now. The presence. It was real. The phone buzzed one last time. My pulse thundered in my ears as I reached for it, unable to resist. I didn't even have to unlock it this time. The message was already on the screen. He's here. I froze. The air in the room seemed to hold its breath. My body locked in place as I stared at the message, waiting. And then, from the darkness behind me, a cold hand touched my shoulder. The hand on my shoulder was cold. Ice cold, as if it had come from the deepest, darkest part of the night. My body tensed, every muscle frozen in fear. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I couldn't even breathe. The sensation lingered for what felt like an eternity, yet time seemed to stretch beyond anything I could comprehend. It was a feeling of wrongness, unnatural, foreign. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as the fingers slowly tightened, digging into my skin with an unrelenting grip. I should have pulled away, should have screamed, should have done something. But all I could do was stand there, rigid and paralyzed. Who? My voice cracked as I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. The pressure on my shoulders seemed to increase, as though the entity, whatever it was, didn't want me to turn around. as if it wanted to keep me in the dark. I could feel the air grow colder around me, more suffocating, and then the unmistakable smell of decay hit my nose, a sharp, pungent scent that burned my throat and made my stomach churn. The shadow behind me shifted, like a movement that had no sound, and yet I felt its presence more intensely than ever. I closed my eyes for a moment, desperately trying to gather the courage to turn around. What would I see? Was it human? Or something else, something beyond my comprehension? Then, the phone buzzed again, this time louder than before, cutting through the oppressive silence like a scream. Don't turn around. He's already seen you. I shuddered. The words seemed to be coming from everywhere, and yet, nowhere. The messages weren't just warnings, they were instructions. A command. And then, the grip on my shoulder loosened. I didn't wait another second. I spun around, eyes wide, heart pounding. My breath was ragged as I searched the shadows. But there was nothing. Nothing but the darkened corners of the room, the flickering light from the street lamp outside casting long, distorted shadows against the walls. For a brief moment, I thought I was safe. I thought it had been my imagination, that I had lost my mind. But then, the cold breath against my ear. It was like a whisper, but louder, more forceful. You should not have opened the door. My blood ran cold. My legs felt weak. I stumbled back, pressing myself into the corner of the room, my eyes darting everywhere, trying to find something tangible. Something to hold on to. But all I could see was darkness. I wanted to run. I wanted to leave. But the message, the phone, kept coming back to me. He's in the house now. I pulled my knees up to my chest, holding the phone tight in my hands as if it were the only lifeline left. My hands were shaking uncontrollably, my fingers slick with sweat. There was no way out, no escape from the feeling that something was closing in around me. The walls seemed to grow thinner, the air denser with every passing second. And then, the voice. It wasn't a whisper anymore. It was louder now, clearer, and it didn't come from behind me this time. It was in the room, echoing off the walls, filling the empty spaces. Come find me. It was like an invitation, one that I knew I shouldn't accept, but something inside me, something deep within me, wanted to listen. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head. But deep down, I knew. I knew that whatever this was, whatever it wanted, was no longer just a warning. It had already found me. I swallowed hard, the fear in my chest tightening like a vice. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't just hide forever. It was coming for me, and I had to do something, anything, to fight back. But before I could even stand up, the phone buzzed again. You're not alone. The door opened, slowly, the creaking sound unbearable in the silence. And from the threshold, a figure stepped inside. Not a human figure, something too distorted, too inhuman to even resemble a person. It was dark. Its form was a blur of shadows, but I could see enough. The outline of its body was wrong. Too tall. Too thin. Its arms stretched unnaturally, twitching as if they didn't belong to it, like they were searching for something. Or someone. And then, those eyes. Those deep, black, empty eyes that seemed to stare straight into my soul. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened, and all I could do was watch as the thing stepped closer, its presence engulfing me. The phone buzzed once more. One final message. He's here. I didn't have time to process the words. The figure reached out, its cold fingers brushing my face, sending a shock of terror through my entire body. And then, everything went black. The blackness didn't last long. At first, I was aware only of the cold. The air felt thick and damp, like the oppressive weight of night had clung to me. I opened my eyes slowly, hoping the darkness would dissipate, but it didn't. I was still there, still in the room, at least. I thought it was the same room. The walls, the furniture, the faint outline of the window, everything seemed wrong. My heart pounded in my chest, the echo of fear still pulsing through my veins. I could hear my own breath, shallow and erratic, but the room felt distant, as if it didn't quite belong to me anymore. I tried to sit up, but my body felt heavy, like I was sinking into the floor. My fingers clawed at the ground, the cold, uneven texture beneath me sending chills up my spine. Something was off. Something was terribly wrong. Then the sound came. A soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingers on glass. I froze. My mind raced, but I couldn't make sense of it. It was too quiet to be real, too far away to be close. But there was no mistaking it. It was there. The tapping continued, slower now. I could feel the vibrations through the floor, through my body, a tremor that seemed to seep into my very bones. It wasn't just a sound, it was a presence. A presence that wasn't mine. "Who's there?" I whispered, my voice trembling. But there was no answer. No reassurance. Only the tapping. And then, silence. For a moment, I thought it had stopped, that whatever it was had moved away. Maybe it was my mind, playing tricks on me. But as soon as the thought crossed my mind, a new noise filled the air, a whisper. Barely audible at first, like wind brushing past my ear, but then it grew louder. It was unmistakable. "You can't hide." The words weren't spoken aloud, but they were clearer in my head. A voice that wasn't mine, a presence that wasn't human. It sent a jolt of terror through me, a wave of pure panic that made every nerve in my body scream. I scrambled to my feet, my hands slick with sweat, but the ground beneath me was unsteady, the air thick with an unnatural heaviness. I stumbled forward, my head spinning, the walls closing in around me. There had to be an exit. There had to be a way out. But as I moved, I noticed the room was changing again, shifting, like it was alive and aware. My phone. I reached for it, my hand shaking uncontrollably as I fumbled through the darkness. I had to get out. I had to find something. I needed to see. I needed Buzz. The screen flashed. A message. The light was a beacon in the dark, a sign that maybe, just maybe, I hadn't been abandoned to whatever this was. "You're not alone." The words were simple, cold. And yet, they held a weight I couldn't escape. I wanted to scream, to break down, to throw the phone across the room and forget everything. But I didn't. I couldn't. I had to know more. I unlocked the screen with shaking hands. The image that greeted me wasn't what I expected. A picture. My picture. But it wasn't recent. It was a photo I didn't recognize, taken somewhere I hadn't been. A dark street corner, lit only by a flickering street lamp. A face staring directly at the camera, my face, but older. Pale, gaunt, eyes hollowed out. And behind me, blurred in the shadows, was something else. A shape, distorted, twisted. A figure that didn't belong. I dropped the phone in horror, and the room seemed to grow colder. The shadows seemed to stretch further, reach farther. The tapping resumed, but this time it wasn't from a distance. It was closer. Much closer. I spun around, heart racing, my legs weak with fear. There, standing in the corner of the room, was the figure from the photo. The twisted version of myself. It didn't move at first. It just stood there, watching. Its eyes were wide, unblinking, and cold. It didn't speak. It didn't need to. The silence between us was enough to drown me in terror. And then, just as I thought I might collapse from sheer dread, the voice came again. This time, not in my mind, but right behind me. I told you not to look. I whipped around, but the figure was gone. Vanished, as if it had never been there at all. I didn't know if I could trust my own senses anymore. Was this real? Was any of it? But then, another message buzzed onto the screen. You don't have much time. I didn't need to read it to know what it meant. I could feel it. Something was coming. Something far worse than I could possibly understand. And I was running out of time. I wanted to scream, to shout, to make everything stop. But my voice caught in my throat, strangled by fear. I could still hear the whispers, the tapping, the feeling that something was waiting just behind me, its presence thick and suffocating. The dark corners of the room seemed to pulse with life, as if they were watching me, moving with the rhythm of my panic. But it was the message on my phone that held my attention. The words were still there, glowing in the dim light, burning into my retinas. You don't have much time. I had to do something. Anything. I reached for the phone again, almost afraid of what might appear next. My hand was shaking uncontrollably as I tapped the screen to unlock it, but my fingers seemed to move too slowly, as if time itself had slowed down to mock me. I could feel the weight of the darkness closing in around me, the silence so thick it almost suffocated me. The tapping had stopped, but the room felt more alive than ever, as if it were breathing with me, waiting for something. When the screen finally unlocked, I froze. Another message. He's already inside. The words hit me like a physical blow, and my blood ran cold. Who was he? What was it referring to? My breath hitched in my throat as I stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. But deep down, I knew. I knew I couldn't escape this. The air shifted suddenly, colder, thicker. I felt a weight on my chest, as if an unseen hand was pressing down on me. The whispers grew louder, sharper. My vision blurred for a moment, and I reached out, gripping the edge of the nearby table to steady myself. The room swirled, everything around me moving in slow motion, warping into something unnatural. My mind screamed at me to run, but my legs felt like lead, my body immobilized by some unseen force. And then I heard it. A sound. Soft at first, like the shuffle of footsteps across a floor. But it wasn't a person. No, it was something else. Something heavy, dragging itself forward with a kind of purpose, a slow, deliberate pace. I felt it, just on the edge of my hearing, like a presence moving through the dark, circling me. I turned quickly, half expecting to see that twisted figure from the corner of the room. But nothing. The room was empty. Too empty. My pulse quickened. I told you. The voice came again, but this time it was different. It was louder, clearer. I knew it wasn't in my head anymore. It was in the room with me. It was real. I backed away from the table, my feet unsteady, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was behind me. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it breathing down my neck, moving closer with every passing second. I turned to face the door, my mind screaming for escape, but as I took a step forward, the air grew even thicker. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The door was still there, just a few feet away, but it felt miles away. The room seemed to stretch, to distort, pulling me further from it with every step I took. The walls began to ripple, bending like waves on water. And then there was a sound. A scraping noise, followed by a low, guttural growl. It was real. I wasn't imagining it. Whatever was here, it was not human. The air was now so dense, so heavy with dread, that I could barely move. My heart hammered in my chest, but every instinct told me to stay still. To hide. To wait. But wait for what? A shuffling sound grew louder behind me, closer. Closer still. My feet refused to move, frozen to the floor by some unseen force. I had to run. Without thinking, I bolted toward the door, my hand shaking as I fumbled with the handle. It wouldn't open. Panic surged through me as I pulled harder, but it was as if the door itself had locked me in. The metal was cold, smooth, unyielding. A shadow moved past the edge of the door. I whipped around to face it, my breath shallow, my mind racing. The room was alive with whispers now, all around me. They grew louder and louder, drowning out everything else, until I couldn't hear anything except their chilling refrain. He's here. The temperature dropped dramatically. I could see my breath in front of me, thick, foggy clouds hanging in the air. It felt like winter had come early, or maybe it was something else. Something unnatural. The walls seemed to contract, the ceiling lowering, as if the very space I was in was becoming smaller, more suffocating. I had to get out. I couldn't stay here. But I didn't know how. I didn't know what was happening. The shadow grew darker, more defined. I glanced to the side, and that's when I saw it. The figure, the same one from the photo. It was standing in the far corner of the room, staring at me with those empty, hollow eyes. It wasn't moving. It didn't need to. It was already there. It's time. And then, just as I thought I couldn't take it any longer, the phone buzzed again. I didn't need to read it. I could feel it. I could feel the presence moving closer, crawling under my skin, burrowing deep into my thoughts. Don't look back. But it was too late. I already had. And now, there was no turning back. It was supposed to be a normal morning. The kind of morning where everything happens in the same familiar routine. I brushed my teeth while standing in front of the bathroom mirror, the fluorescent lights above flickering slightly as I did. The soft hum of the bathroom fan filled the air, mixing with the sound of running water from the faucet. Nothing out of the ordinary. Except something was off. I stared at my reflection as I continued brushing, trying to ignore the creeping feeling at the back of my mind. I wasn't sure what it was, but there was something strange in the way I moved. At first, I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks on me, but then it happened again. My reflection's hand, moved just a fraction of a second slower than my own. I stopped mid-brush, holding the toothbrush between my teeth, staring at the mirror. The reflection of my hand hovered in the air, as though it were stretching the time between my movements. It wasn't much, just a small difference, but it was enough to make me feel uneasy. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I was tired, that maybe I just needed a break from work. I resumed brushing, focusing on the minty foam in my mouth, hoping the unease would disappear. But when I looked again, my reflection wasn't just delayed. It was moving differently. My hand, still holding the toothbrush, started to tilt slightly, but not at the same angle I had. It almost seemed like my reflection had a life of its own. I leaned in, narrowing my eyes, and then it happened. My reflection's hand clenched into a fist. I froze. It wasn't just a gesture of normal motion. No, this was deliberate. My own hand was still loosely holding the toothbrush, but the one in the mirror had formed a tight, trembling fist. And then, it knocked gently against the mirror. It was soft, almost like a whisper, but I heard it. The sound of knuckles gently tapping on glass. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. My heart began to race. I stood there for a moment, unable to move, staring at the mirror as the image of my hand rested unnaturally still, almost like it was waiting for something. I slowly put the toothbrush down, my mind racing. It had to be a trick of the light, a shadow, something that could explain it. I moved my hand again, cautiously, but this time I made sure it was a deliberate movement, slow, controlled. My reflection followed, but when I stopped, it didn't. My reflection's fist tightened even more. It was like it was mimicking my movements, but in a distorted, twisted way. I leaned closer, unable to look away. What was happening? This couldn't be real. I didn't know what was worse, the fact that my reflection was behaving so unnaturally, or the fact that it was starting to feel like something was trying to communicate with me. Suddenly, the fist in the mirror, no longer content with tapping, struck the glass harder. The thud echoed in the bathroom like a dull, muffled sound that made my skin crawl. I jumped back, gasping, the blood draining from my face. The mirror was alive. For a second, I could almost hear a whisper from the other side of the glass. It wasn't my voice. It was something darker. And then, just as quickly as it had happened, everything went still. My reflection returned to normal, mirroring my movements perfectly. The eerie sensation faded, leaving me to wonder if it had all been in my head. But then, I noticed something strange. A small, almost imperceptible crack had formed along the bottom of the mirror. It wasn't much, just a faint line, but it was there. I stared at it for a long moment. And that's when I realized the thing in the mirror wasn't just mimicking me. It was trying to tell me something. But what? I stepped back, my pulse quickening as I tried to process what had just happened. I was shaking now, unsure of what to do next. Was I losing my mind? Had I imagined the tapping, the fist? I glanced at the mirror again, but my reflection seemed as normal as ever. There was no indication that anything out of the ordinary had occurred. Yet, the crack remained. A sudden chill swept through the room, the temperature dropping rapidly as I stared at the mirror. The crack spread a little further, and I heard it again, the faintest tapping. This time, it wasn't just my reflection that moved. It felt as if something was trying to get out. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. It was just a mirror. It had to be. But in my gut, I could feel it. Something was wrong. I backed away, not daring to take my eyes off the mirror. But the moment I turned, the tapping grew louder. It was no longer a tap. It was a knock. And it was coming from inside. You shouldn't have looked. The voice was soft at first, barely a whisper, but it sent a chill through me that made my knees tremble. I didn't dare to turn back. But I knew, deep down, I had no choice but to face what was happening. And that's when I saw it, a shape in the mirror, creeping just at the edge of my vision. I wasn't alone anymore. I couldn't look away. My breath came in shallow gasps as the shape in the mirror slowly emerged from the shadows, just barely visible in my peripheral vision. It was there, standing still, watching me. I couldn't tell if it was a person or something else entirely. The figure was distorted, almost fluid, and yet it had a presence that felt too real to ignore. The tapping stopped. It was replaced by something far worse. A slow dragging sound, like nails scraping against glass, followed by a whisper that seemed to echo from within the mirror itself. "Come closer." I felt my chest tighten, my body screaming to move, to run, but I couldn't. I was rooted to the spot. The figure in the mirror wasn't just a reflection anymore. It had weight. It had intent. And it was calling me. I took a tentative step back, my feet stumbling over the cold tiles. The air around me had become thick, almost suffocating, and the temperature had dropped further until I could see my breath in front of me in tiny, trembling clouds. The mirror, once just a simple object in the corner of the room, now seemed to pulse, almost alive. The faint crack along its surface had widened, a jagged line running from top to bottom. As I watched, I could swear the crack was growing, inch by inch, like it was breaking apart, piece by piece. I forced my eyes to stay locked on the mirror. I could see the shape now more clearly. Its outline was humanoid, but there was something wrong with it. The figure was hunched, its posture unnatural, as if it didn't belong in this space, in this reality. It raised one arm, and my own reflection did the same, but this time, there was no delay. It wasn't moving at a different pace than me. It was moving in perfect sync, like we were connected, like we were one. Except, the arm in the mirror wasn't my arm. The reflection's hand wasn't just mirroring me, it was moving on its own, with purpose, and it began to press against the surface of the glass. I wanted to scream. I wanted to do anything to break the connection, but I couldn't move. I felt like I was frozen in place, bound by something invisible. The whisper grew louder. "You have to let me out." I closed my eyes tightly, my mind racing. This couldn't be real. None of this made sense. But when I opened them again, the figure in the mirror was closer, its face now just inches from the glass. It had no eyes, just empty sockets that seemed to pierce into my very soul. I stepped back, my heart pounding in my chest. I glanced around the room, looking for anything I could use to defend myself. But there was nothing. The bathroom, once a safe, familiar place, had turned into something alien and hostile. The figure in the mirror stretched its hand out toward me, as if it were reaching for me. I could feel the pressure building in my chest, my breath coming in short, desperate gasps. The air was thick with the scent of something damp and musty, like the smell of decay. And then, just as I thought I might lose control, something happened. The mirror cracked. A sharp, deafening sound shattered the tense silence as the glass splintered, the lines of the crack spreading like a spider's web across its surface. The figure's hand slid through the gap, its fingers scraping against the glass in a sound that made my skin crawl. "You shouldn't have looked." The voice was stronger now, clearer, as though it was no longer just a whisper. It was real. It was here, on this side of the mirror, in the room with me. I stumbled backward, my feet slipping against the wet tiles. My mind raced to process what was happening. Was this really happening? Was the mirror truly breaking, or was I losing my grip on reality? The hand in the mirror pushed through further, the glass shards falling away like sand, the reflection distorting as the figure began to emerge. Its body moved with unnatural fluidity, stretching and contorting in ways that shouldn't have been possible. I was trapped. There was no escape. No way out. And then, just as the last piece of the mirror shattered, the figure stepped fully into the room. It was taller than I had imagined, its limbs long and disproportionate, like something from a nightmare. It had a face, but not in the way I expected. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and its eyes were deep black voids, swirling with shadows that seemed to move and shift. I couldn't scream. I couldn't even breathe. It reached out to me, its fingers cold and clammy, its touch sending an icy shock through my spine. "You're mine now." The words echoed in my mind, louder than any sound I had ever heard before. And as I felt its fingers brush against my skin, I realized this wasn't just a reflection. It was something else, something that had crossed the line between the mirror and reality. Something that wanted me. And it had already taken hold. I couldn't move. My legs felt like lead, my mind a swirl of terror, and yet the figure's hand was still inches from me. The air around me seemed to close in, suffocating, thick with the metallic scent of broken glass and something far worse, something that felt ancient, wrong. The figure, now fully out of the mirror, stood before me, towering and impossibly still. I couldn't look away from its black, swirling eyes, as if something deep within them was calling to me, pulling at me. I should have screamed. I should have run. But I couldn't. My body was locked in place, like it was no longer my own, as if I were being drawn into the depths of its gaze, being swallowed by it. The air grew colder. My breath fogged in front of me, swirling in the thickened atmosphere. The figure's fingers twitched, its skin pale and translucent, as though it had never seen the light of day. It reached out slowly, deliberately, and with each inch closer it got, I felt a wave of freezing dread coursing through my body. "You can't escape." The voice was louder now, not in my head, but real, its whisper in the very air, vibrating the walls, the ceiling, the floor beneath my feet. My pulse thundered in my ears. I felt the weight of something immense pressing down on me, forcing me to stay rooted to the spot. It wasn't just a mirror anymore. The whole room felt alive, as if every object, every shadow, was part of something greater. A trap. The figure's fingers brushed my arm, and a jolt of cold shot through me, deeper than I could comprehend. It wasn't just a touch, it was like its coldness was seeping into my skin, crawling under my flesh, numbing me from the inside out. I gasped, trying to pull away, but my body wouldn't obey. It felt as though my skin was being pulled, stretched, like the very fabric of reality was bending around me. "You belong to me now." The words crawled through my mind, like an invasive thought I couldn't push away. I wanted to scream, to fight, to break free of whatever force had taken hold of me, but my mouth wouldn't open. My body was still. My mind was trapped. The more it spoke, the more I felt myself fading, drowning in its voice, in its presence. The figure's hand closed around my wrist, and everything around me seemed to shudder, the room warping as if the air itself had turned to liquid. The walls seemed to stretch, the shadows becoming darker, more suffocating. I could no longer tell what was real and what was not. Its face, its pale, featureless face, shifted. The black voids that were once its eyes stretched wide, pulling at my vision, distorting everything. I couldn't tell if it was smiling or just opening its mouth to speak, but I could feel its breath. Cold. Chilling. Like the deepest depths of winter. I tried to look away, to break free from its grip, but it was like trying to look away from the darkness itself. My body was unwilling, my mind too weak to resist. The mirror, it had been just the beginning. This thing, this creature, was not just an echo from the glass. It was something far more dangerous. Something that had slipped through, something that was now a part of me, as much as I was part of it. There was no escaping it now. No one escapes me. The words were final, unyielding. The world around me felt like it was closing in, like the very fabric of reality itself was unthreading at the edges. I could feel the ground beneath me beginning to soften, as though I were no longer standing on solid floor, but sinking into something far darker, far colder. My legs buckled, but I didn't fall. Instead, it was as if the floor had melted away beneath me. I was floating. No, being dragged. Pulled by some unseen force, deeper into the room, deeper into the blackness that seemed to grow around me. The figure was still there, looming, watching. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't scream. I felt the coldness of its touch spread through me, from my wrist, through my arm, into my chest. It was suffocating me from the inside. My heart was pounding so loudly I could barely hear the whispers of the figure. "You will never leave. Not again." The last words echoed, and then everything went black. I woke up, gasping, my hands clutching at the bed sheets. My heart pounded in my chest as though I had just run a marathon. Sweat clung to my skin. My eyes snapped open, but the room around me was dim, peaceful. I was in my bed. My room. Everything seemed so normal. I sat up quickly, my head spinning. The clock read 3:14 a.m. It had been a dream. It had to have been. There was no other explanation. My hands were shaking as I wiped my face, trying to steady myself. But then, as I turned to glance at the mirror across the room, I froze. My reflection was staring back at me, but it wasn't mine. My reflection was smiling. I couldn't tear my eyes away. The reflection in the mirror was still, unmistakably mine, but it was off. The smile. It wasn't my smile. It was whiter, colder, as if something inside that reflection was enjoying my terror. My own face seemed to twist in a way that shouldn't have been possible. My heart skipped a beat. I blinked rapidly, trying to shake off the feeling, but when I opened my eyes again, the smile was still there. It was as if it had a life of its own. That's not possible, I thought. It's just a reflection. It's not real. But even as I whispered this to myself, I felt the room growing colder. A strange, palpable pressure began to build around me. The air thickened, turning almost suffocating, like something was pushing in from all sides. And then I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, a movement in the reflection, a subtle shift. My reflection's hand, still by its side, slowly lifted. I wasn't moving it. My body remained frozen, my heart thudding against my ribcage. My breath came shallow, quick, but my reflection continued to lift its hand, each finger curling with a deliberate slowness. I watched in disbelief as it raised its hand higher, inching closer to the mirror's surface, its fingers elongating, stretching unnaturally. The coldness in the air deepened, and the oppressive pressure increased, as if the reflection was trying to break through, to reach out and touch me. My own hand trembled. I instinctively reached out to the mirror, my fingers brushing against the cold glass, but the reflection mirrored me perfectly, my hand matching the movement of the one inside the glass. I hesitated, my mind reeling. It's a reflection, I told myself. It's just a trick of the light. But it wasn't. I could see it now. My reflection wasn't copying my every move anymore. It was ahead of me, more alive, more aware that I was. And then, without warning, the figure in the mirror clenched its fist. I recoiled, but the fist in the reflection tightened faster than I could react, and I felt a sharp, cold pain in my own hand. I jerked back, gasping in shock as an invisible force seemed to pull at my wrist. The force was so intense, it felt like the hand in the mirror was physically gripping me, squeezing, twisting. I tried to pull away, but the grip didn't relent. The reflection's face grinned wider, its eyes black and unblinking, and for a moment, I thought I saw something deeper in those eyes, something far darker than mere malice. A hunger. You shouldn't have looked, the voice whispered from the mirror. It wasn't just the words. It was the tone. The voice came from all around me, vibrating through the walls, through my bones. It was everywhere. I staggered backward, my breath shallow, my heart racing. I could feel the invisible fingers still tightening, as though the reflection's hand was reaching through the mirror itself, dragging me in. I pushed myself back against the wall, away from the mirror, desperate to escape. But the grip wouldn't loosen. You belong to me now, the voice echoed in my mind, seeping into my thoughts, wrapping around them like a vice. No. No. This can't be happening. I snapped my head toward the door, but it felt like the room was closing in on me. I couldn't see the corners anymore. The shadows around me were growing darker, deeper. It was as if the mirror had become a portal, its influence stretching further, taking over everything. I needed to get away. I turned on my heel and bolted toward the door, pulling on the handle, but it wouldn't budge. My pulse roared in my ears. I tugged again, harder, panic rising as I realized the door was locked from the inside. There was no way out. I pressed my back against the door, breathing heavily, my mind spiraling. It's not real. It's not real. But even as I thought it, I could still feel the cold of the reflection's grip on my wrist, still see its eyes, wide with anticipation, watching my every move. I couldn't fight it. There was nothing to fight. You can't run from me, it whispered, and I felt the words reverberate through my bones. I'm already here. The reflection in the mirror shifted again, its hand reaching through the glass like liquid shadow, the fingers stretching, elongating, until they reached for me. I stared in disbelief, unable to move, as the fingers grazed the surface of the door I was pressed against. My skin crawled, a cold, creeping sensation creeping up my spine. I turned away from the door, looking around the room for anything to use, anything to defend myself. My eyes landed on the chair by the desk, nothing but a dull, wooden object. But before I could make any move toward it, the whispering began again, louder this time, coming from every direction, drowning out all other sound. You're mine. Forever. The last of my thoughts disappeared. There was nothing but the black, empty void of the reflection, and the cold, unrelenting grip pulling me in. And then, just like that, I was gone. I woke up in my bed again. No force gripping me, no mirror staring back at me. My hand, still trembling, lay at my side, untouched. The room around me was quiet, still. I let out a shaky breath. I looked over at the mirror, but it was empty. The reflection was just me. I tried to calm my racing heart. Maybe it was just a nightmare. Maybe I'd imagined it all. But as I turned away to pull myself together, I saw something out of the corner of my movement. I looked back at the mirror, and there, in the reflection, was a hand, reaching out. It wasn't mine. I couldn't breathe. My eyes fixed on the hand in the mirror, my body rooted to the spot. It wasn't just moving. It was waiting. The fingers twitched as if it knew I was watching, as if it had been waiting for me to notice. It wasn't mine. It couldn't be. I forced myself to take a step backward, but my legs felt weak, unsteady. The mirror seemed to stretch before me, its surface rippling, distorting the image like water disturbed by an unseen current. The reflection of my own face, my face, grinned back at me with an unnatural, chilling expression, as if mocking me. My stomach churned, and a cold sweat broke out on my skin. It's just a trick. It's not real. The thought repeated in my mind, but it couldn't drown out the sickening reality of what I was seeing. The hand in the mirror wasn't just reaching anymore. It was moving slowly, but steadily, toward the edge of the frame. As the fingers crept closer, I could almost hear the faint scrape of nails against the glass. The sound was subtle at first, barely audible, like the rustle of fabric. But then it grew louder, sharp, like fingernails against chalkboard. No, no, no! I wanted to scream, but my throat closed up. I couldn't look away. The hand was alive, not a mere reflection, but something real. Something that was coming for me. I took another shaky step backward. The hand in the mirror followed suit, its fingers curling, stretching toward me with a horrific slowness. But this time, something was different. Something that sent a wave of ice through my veins. The reflection in the mirror wasn't just imitating my movements anymore. It was anticipating them. I could feel it. I could feel its presence pressing against me, suffocating me. I stumbled backward until my legs hit the edge of my bed, and I collapsed onto it, heart hammering in my chest. My mind raced. What was happening? What was that thing in the mirror? The image shifted again. The fingers in the mirror curled tightly into a fist, and the reflection of my own hand clenched in response, against my will. I tried to pull away, but the grip on my body was real. It was no longer just a reflection. It was as if the hand from the mirror had latched onto me, its invisible force tightening around my wrist. I gasped, my breath hitching in my throat, as my hand jerked against my will, moving toward the mirror. My body wasn't responding. My own reflection was forcing me to come closer, pulling me toward the glass like it was a prison I couldn't escape. What is it? I thought, my mind spiraling. Why is this happening? And then, a sound, low, guttural, almost a growl, came from the reflection. It wasn't a voice, not exactly. It was something deeper, more primal, as if the very space behind the mirror was alive, aware of my fear. You belong to me. The words reverberated in my skull, sending a tremor of cold through my limbs. The reflection's hand tightened on my wrist, dragging me closer, and I couldn't fight it. I couldn't break free. I tried to scream, but the sound caught in my throat. The mirror, it wasn't just a reflection anymore. It was an opening, a portal to something dark, something that had been waiting, watching, stalking me. I could feel it now, a presence, something ancient and malevolent, creeping up behind me. I glanced at the door, but it was useless. It felt like the entire room had shifted, like I was trapped in the reflection. The walls, the space, everything around me seemed to be warping, twisting, as if reality itself was breaking down. I pulled at my wrist, desperately trying to free myself, but the grip of the reflection was too strong. The pressure intensified, a burning cold seeping into my skin, making my fingers go numb. I was slipping, falling into it, into the mirror. The reflection's grin widened, growing disturbingly unnatural, stretching until its face seemed to lose all human resemblance. It wasn't me anymore. It was something else entirely, something worse. You'll never escape. The reflection didn't just move now, it shifted. The entire figure twisted and contorted, warping unnaturally like it was made of liquid. The fingers on the other side of the glass pressed harder against the surface, the glass itself now rippling as if trying to pull me in, dragging my very essence toward the reflection. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. And then, I felt the cold. It wasn't just in the air. It was in my bones. It was inside me. I turned around and saw the darkness behind me, pooling like ink, like a shadow rising up from the floor. It crawled toward me, stretching out with long, sinewy limbs. It was coming for me. The figure, the thing, reached for me. And just before it touched me, my mind screamed in terror. But nothing came out. And then everything went black. I woke again, cold, alone. I sat up in my bed, eyes darting around, chest rising and falling rapidly as if I had just run a marathon. The room was still. Silent. Everything was as it should be. But my skin still tingled with the sensation of something cold, something not of this world, clinging to me. I looked toward the mirror, half expecting to see the reflection. But there was nothing. Nothing at all. It was just a dream. It had to be. It wasn't real. But even as I thought it, I felt the cold, sharp pain in my wrist, just like the grip of that hand. I stared at the mirror for a long time, waiting for the inevitable. Something in me knew it would come back. That it never really left. And when I finally turned away, I heard it. A tap. From the other side of the glass. And the hand was there. Reaching through. Hope your dreams are filled with fear. Good night.